Hello, 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 hello. Yeah, I also, now that I think about it, have a wee story, but hello.
You might be wondering what the wee story is all about. Just before we started streaming live, we were discussing what we were going to do. And I said, I've got a tiny story to begin. And it is the smallest of stories. Because
hold on.
as most of you out there probably know, I'm not the most experienced when it comes to all the lore that's been sourced from Total War.
We're not live on YouTube yet. Hold on.
We're not?
No, give it a second.
Let me just have a quick check over there.
I'm just refreshing on the page until it starts. Okay, we're
live YouTube now. Sometimes takes a little bit of time to catch up.
Yeah, we're good now. We're good. Okay, you may continue.
Excellent. As I was saying, just in case you lovely YouTube people didn't catch it, we were discussing before we went live what we were going to open with. And I said, I've got a tiny wee story. And obviously, Sotek also said, I've got one too. But my one is going to be tiny because my lore knowledge for today is kind of weak. But I think that's half the fun of these streams when we occasionally hit upon things that one of us knows much more about than the others, because we can sit there and interrogate and ask questions and go, wait a minute, what does that mean for this? And we end up coming with some really fun interpretations and conclusions by the end of it.
Yes, indeed. So what is your story?
My story's super small, and it's, I think, a fun way for us to open up affairs, and that is, as you often know, I like to start with taking us back in time to some previous event. My, let's say, rather long history with Warhammer.
We do a lot of time traveling on this show.
Yeah, quite. To bring something up. So I would like to take you all back in time to a week ago. A week ago, I was sitting down in my new office, which still isn't connected to the internet. And I was testing out the PC, making sure that everything was working. And I decided to play a campaign with Miao Ying. And a part of that campaign was obviously kicking ass and chewing gum across Cathay. And I eventually arrived at the good old Cathayan capital. And I was like, holy shitballs, yes, I'm going to invade and pretty much bring down the capital, because who doesn't like the idea of doing that? And through the course of this game, where I did indeed take over all of Cathay, and I did indeed destroy Gelt and put him exactly where he deserved to bloody be, which was on the end of my long pointy heel, crunch. Thanks, Cathay, you are now very much all mine. Through the course of that, I kept on obviously going back to the capital again and again and again and again. And every time I did so, I was left just going, I want to know more. I really want to know more. I don't know an awful lot about this. I know very little about this. And through the course of the play, we obviously had the good old Celestial Compass popping up again and again. We had references to the Celestial City popping up again and again. We had references to the capital popping up again and again. Floating that Celestial City up was super fun. Click. Yes, I've got the advantages of that now. Woo! But every single time I pressed those buttons, I was left, much like many of you out there who perhaps are coming to Warhammer lore for the first time, regarding large chunks of the Warhammer world, left going, but I'm hungry. I'm thirsty for more, man. I need to inject more Warhammer into my veins. This is not good. So it was a bit more than a week ago. It was about a week and a half. And at the end of our discussion last week, we were deciding what topics to potentially discuss for the week after. My first one was, I would really like to know more about the Imperial capital. So let's put that on the list because I want to know more. So I would like to start our stream today by saying huge thank you, a massive thank you, in fact, to everyone that voted for this topic this week, because we could have been discussing something else, which inevitably would have meant I had to do a hell of a lot more, thinking. But this week, it's about a topic that I know very little about. So I get to turn over to Sotek and say, hey, Sotek, take it away.
And he says that like he's not someone that's cursed to eternally think, which we all know he is.
Stop. I've even got my own little candy bar sitting over here, because I will call it a candy bar because we are dealing with an American audience too. It's really not a candy bar. It made me sick almost saying that. But I've got myself a bar that I can eat. I'm diabetic, normally can't eat these things. It's an Oreo one as well. And it's pretty disgusting if you compare it to real chocolate. But I am going to chow down in this as I listen to good old Sotek telling us lorry tales and then diving in with my own opinions and stuff.
You made that sound so appetizing.
Welcome to the life of a diabetic.
Yeah. Yeah. where I'm also really excited about this week's episode because it does open a bunch of really interesting cans of worms. I'm gonna be honest, I was really surprised that Wei-Jin, the Celestial City, won, considering what it was going up against. Like Grail Knights did do well in the grand scheme of things, but not nearly as well. And poor old Rakarth was getting his was just getting curb stomped down over
He really was
in the third corner of the arena there. But that's all right. We'll visit them another time. So yeah, this will be a really good time. I am really excited to talk about this. My brain is eager. My body is a little weak. I drove for about 8 hours yesterday. Covered about what was it, like 500 or 600 miles in 2 sittings, which is a lot, but
that is a lot.
Such is the sacrifice. Yeah, I drove down to Houston to celebrate my one of my second cousin graduating high school, which makes me feel ancient because as far as my memory is concerned, he's still a baby. But nope, he's an adult now. So he graduated. So we popped down there, said hello for a party that lasted 2 hours, then got back in the car and drove all the way back.
Yesterday, just because it's a nice way to open the stream as everyone gathers. If you don't know out there, it generally takes around about 10 minutes for everyone to go, oh yeah, they're live, and arrive. So it's nice for us to have our little bit of banter. I was yesterday at a convention here, a Chimera convention. It's a festival for horror, fantasy, and science fiction. And I was doing a big workshop for people to come up. It was sold out. It was lovely. Loads of people came. But I was ill. Now, if you don't know, we missed our Wednesday stream because I was ill. My face swelled up like a bloody melon. It was horrible. And I was bright red. And by the time yesterday, I was almost ready to do it. My face had gone back to its normal proportions, which for them was good. But it was still red and blotchy and was pretty horrible. And I felt awful. But the show must go on. So I put on my brave face and did the thing. And we did ourselves a live Inside the Rookery stream from there as well, where the sound was terrible. I had to actually take it down afterwards. The sound was terrible. I'm going to see if I can do anything to clear it up. Today, I'm just actually really good. So delighted to be on the whale side.
Wonderful.
It's all been lovely over here. I've been diving into all my jobs, and I'm super looking forward to this stream. I think one thing that's also worth bringing up is that obviously we're going to have super chats that are coming in. We'll take those in batches. We have a bunch of things that we'd like to discuss about the good old Cathayan capital. But having said that, we also are aware that you'll have a bunch of questions that you'd like to have addressed through the course of the super chats, but we will take them in breaks as we go along because we don't want to obviously just be answering super chats as we go. But grabbing into those as we begin is probably a good place to start.
Yep. So let's hop right into it. What, Hammond? What? Are you? Congrats, Hammond. Congrats. We're
Sure.
excited for you. We're excited.
I feel
for
like
you
I missed something here.
Yeah. Can you burn a Luigi board? Yes, you can burn anything if you try hard enough.
Luigi board.
Schwarz, continue the saga. Bring back the Throne of Chaos. Yeah, we'll be back this Wednesday. It'll be on Andy's channel, and we'll be talking about the Slaanesh brother. Because it's Slaanesh, we wanted to tease you. We wanted to draw it out. So we'll see you. We'll see you on Wednesday. CB4N. We know Shin Yang is a fan of the clean, crisp state of social media influencer. What? Grimlow's Prime Slan hydration system. But is it really enough fuel to keep him going when he is waging war on the ogres? Man,
Wow.
I would like to know how long you were sitting on that. Like, because I refuse to accept that you came up with that on a whim. Is that? Oh my God, there's like 3 or 4 jokes all contained within that one joke. That's impressive. I'm gonna say no. Jackie, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Jackie.
Generous super chat. We appreciate that. Thank you guys so much for doing these streams. Due to them, I've started wanting to write specifically Warhammer stuff. Every time you guys say there's a beautiful story here, I end up with thoughts for a story. Thanks for everything. Oh, we appreciate
Okay, so I do have something to say on that. Write it down. There is nothing like writing to get yourself wanting to write more stuff. Also, if you do want to share it, which you might not want to do, so you might prefer just to write it down yourself and have your own little squirrely part of a hard drive where you hide everything. But if you do want, we've got a creative channel over on the LAWhammer side of Discord. There's probably a link for that. If you're on the YouTube side, I didn't check if you're on YouTube or Twitch, but if you're on YouTube, it'll be down inside the video description. It was YouTube, brilliant. It'll be down inside the video description. The link through to the LAWhammer Discord. We've got a creative channel there where you can just post any art, writing, poems, anything else that you think is creative and cool. Feel free to share it there, and you can get other people to come along and say, "Oh, thanks for sharing that." Obviously, we have lots of Warhammery channels there as well too.
Yeah, and the people in the LAWhammer Discord are very polite and nice. So
Oh, we're lovely over there. Yeah,
I would encourage you to share it, but certainly you don't have to if you don't want to.
And if you're not, we'll curb stomp you.
He means about being nice. He means about being not like you can post. You don't have to post. They won't beat you if you don't post. All right.
That's true.
Killer. Sad that Cathay wasn't part of the old world launch. Now I don't know which army to start with, or I should just be patient. Thanks for the show. Platinum Killer, I will say I've heard it on pretty damn good authority that Cathay is in the eventual cards, but if the speed GW moves, that could be like 2 or 3 years at minimum. They move when it comes to like the actual tabletop game, they move very slow. Like I wouldn't be surprised if they were like, oh, we'll do Cathay as like the 2nd edition launch faction, which I mean that could be that probably would be like 2 years from now.
Yeah, I can only agree. If you are keen to play the old world, grab yourself an old world army that you like that's available now. Give it a go.
Yeah, especially because using like third-party stuff or 3D printing or just looking for people that are selling their old minis, you can find some really cheap ways to get into the game and just get used to it. That way you know how to play the game. So when Cathay comes out, you can start playing Cathay. Laughing God, a little off topic, but Andy, did you see that some scientists cured a man with type 2 diabetes using gene therapy?
I did. And let's see if that's true or not. Because if that passes through various trials, I am going to be on the receiving end of that bad boy. That would be lovely.
Yeah. Quizzer Thomas, guys, help. Balthazar Gelt is squatting in the Imperial Palace. You have to get him to leave before Big Daddy gets back, or else Zao will be grounded. It's the Monkey King all over again. Tyrant 25. I think Andy needs a title like Loremaster of Sotek. May I suggest Chosen of Nurgle?
Tyrant, you wouldn't be wrong. I'm actually post-COVID. I'm actually at the point now where I'm kind of used to falling really quite extremely ill about once every 2 to 3 weeks. It generally only lasts for a day or two. I know I've got a compromised immune system. I have been with my doctor about the various ailments that ail me multiple times, but holy hell, you're not wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, this, I think more appropriate is just Andy is our world's Pox Fulcrum.
Yeah.
So beforehand, came to me while I was watching Smoky Mountain Wrestling from the early 90s, thinking about Criminal and the exercise bike this morning. See, there it is. Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you for the story.
Well, thank you for clarifying.
Do you think likes Wei-Jin War more? To actually answer your pun of a question, I feel very strongly it would probably be Yin Yin, who actually enjoys it because she gets to choose more often when to wage war as opposed to constantly being on the defense.
And personally, I would really like to see some more lore about her so that she's just not the butt of the wars that go wrong jokes. It'd be nice.
Like you would, I think a lot of people would think it would be Li Dao, but we actually have a number of quotes from Li Dao, and he comes off as being extremely envious and not enjoying what he does. So yeah. Bulwark,
agreed.
Andy, what do you think of how Total War Warhammer 3 visually shows off the Celestial City? It's a big floating rock.
It's fine. Yeah, it's literally fine. I don't have a great deal of, now this is going to come off negative, it absolutely isn't, but I don't have a great deal of time for how they really portray any of the cities across the entirety of the Warhammer world, largely because they are almost pretty much copy-paste assets for each one of the different factions, just used again and again and again in different ways because of the realities of creating a large game. Now, would I like them to have finally created their own individual, really pretty versions for each one of them? Yeah. But then again, I also like to have a game that I can play released in a realistic timescale. So whilst I say I don't like the way they're presented, that's perhaps a strong way which I could reinterpret as I like playing the game. Sure, I'd like an Altdorf that looks like Altdorf or a Nuln that looks like Nuln, for example. They really don't. Marienburg is objectionably awful. But that doesn't mean that I don't like the game as a whole, just to make sure we're super clear on that. So I don't really have strong opinions in this one, while simultaneously it's there, floating away, doing its thing.
For Cathay, you can use models you think appropriate with the old world Empire rules. I've seen it done for them, with people using Kislev and Nippon. Yeah, that's also a viable option, is that you could start working on your own minis from like third-party vendors, or making your own, because there's so many ways to do that nowadays, which is wild. So
And
yeah, just play it.
to support that one, Mandatis, I agree. Using another army as a proxy for yours. So, say, for example, using the Empire army to be your Cathayan army, but just using Cathayan models and saying, I'm using balanced rules from the old world, at least. Not that the old world's frightfully balanced. Let's just not get into that kind of worms. But doing that is a really good idea, and I also do recommend it. So, if you want to play with, say, Cathay, or indeed anything else, feel free to just use someone else's army list and create your own models for them. I'll give an example from my own history. I used to use yeah, I've still got the model for it somewhere over there. I used to use giant white wolf riding Ulricans because I thought that was cool at the time, and I used the rules Demigris from the Empire for that, for my Middenheim army. Hey, so my Middenheim army had these white wolf riding crazy Ulricans, which were just too cool for school, and I just used the Demigriff rules for those. So I had myself rules that worked and were balanced for the game, but simultaneously they were my own unique versions for them for my game.
Yes, indeed. What I'm really curious about is the Monkey King taking the city, and what his occupation would have looked like. Also, what is his name? Shegara?
Shegara. Ooh. Hey, laughing God, that's some fighting talk from some people there. If you pulled that one off, I'm personally really interested to see what they do with the Monkey King as a whole, because there have been multiple conflicting versions of what the Monkey King could be, ranging from truly chaotic and awful right through to something perhaps that isn't. So I'd be really interested to see where they eventually land with it.
Yep, and we will be talking about him quite a bit here in just a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mr. Pig, for a possible army to do until Cathay gets released, a custom Empire army works chaos heavy on the themed Zinch cultists could work. Yeah, I mean, and plus you could, yeah. Empire would probably be the safest bet, but like you can just kind of look at Total War and know what you're going to be expecting.
Yep.
And then real quick, for these Twitch ones, need to finish my Ogre Samurai / Human Noblar Nippon army. that's a... I would be very interested to see those minis. You could make some really fun sculpts with that. That actually reminds me. I remember there was a greenskin player at my local hobby store who had a full greenskin army, but he decided to make all of his orcs and goblins the little, like the Easter egg island statues. So it was a bunch of these goofy statues of various sizes to denote what kind of greenskins they were. It was actually very funny. As long as you could tell what's what, which you could with his army, you could have a lot of fun with those. Closing the book at the end times, one page at a time with the lore beards. How's that for a catchphrase for the show? Closing the book on the end times, one page at
personally,
a time.
Phil, I don't like the idea of closing the book in the Warhammer world at all.
Yeah,
I would much rather think of just turning the pages. We're turning the pages of the old world rather than particularly focusing upon the travesty, as we may have referred to it previously, of the end times.
I'll say it again, travesty. If anything, I feel like Lorebeards is more about, as we're turning pages, we go, oh look, these two pages are stuck together, and we pull them apart and go, oh look, there's more stuff here.
Splash.
Yeah. Who had this book last? What were they doing? Anyway, so with all that out of the way, thank you all so much for the support. Let's get into today's show. So, Wei-Jin and the Celestial City. It's worth noting, for those that are not super duper aware or are new to, haven't like played a lot of Total War or don't know what's going on with this, they are not exactly the same place. These are two separate locations that are right next to each other. So you have Wei-Jin, which is the capital of Grand Cathay, and that is a massive, colossal city that is on the ground. It is like on the earth. It's a quote-unquote regular city, though we'll get into many of the fantastical elements about it in just a minute and what makes it important. And then floating above it is a magical flying palace that's in the air. It's not a full-size city. It's more of a fortress or a fortress palace or whatever verbs or descriptors you want to use, hovering in the air. And that is the Celestial City, where the Celestial Dragon Emperor and the Moon Empress have their thrones, and that's also where the Wuxing Compass, the actual Wuxing Compass, is situated within the floor of their grand throne room, and it's able to be controlled from
so
there.
You know, If you have no idea what that compass is, we will be getting to it because it is an artifact of not just importance, but I would argue extraordinary importance, not just to Cathay, but to, in many respects, the Warhammer world as a whole, because it really does speak to things that can be done.
Yeah, and we will also be for those. I just because I see people already asking. Yes, Yuan Bo is going to be coming up a lot today. He is going to be a pretty key character to what we'll be discussing. But when starting with, I would say it's probably better to start with Wei-Jin itself because it's a little bit simpler of an approach, and there's more relatable things, and then we'll work our way up, quite literally, into the Celestial City. So, looking at Wei-Jin, one of the lead descriptions we have about it that already opens a huge can of worms, which is really, really fun, is that Wei-Jin, the grand city, the almighty capital of Grand Cathay, is stated in Total War to be the largest city on the planet. It is the largest, most sprawled out gathering of civilization that exists on the world and has survived for many, many thousands of years, having been established back when the Celestial Dragon Emperor really started to set up. Now, we don't have the which that alone, there's kind of a joke if you read a lot of Warhammer about whenever someone says that this is the biggest of X or the widest of X or the largest of X, you always are going to go, okay, like take it with salt, because it could just be that particular author has decided, yes, this is the largest of the things I am aware of. Whereas some other authors may not have read that particular area. But Wei-Jin is supposed to be incredibly sprawling. And there are millions upon millions of people that live there. It is you think about Grand Cathay. Grand Cathay has a titanic population compared to what we're used to dealing with in the old world. Especially because as a whole, Grand Cathay is a little more, if you look at the Empire, you often get references about how, especially when you're dealing with the Northern Empire, you have we have bastions of light amongst a sea of darkness because of all these great forests that make it really difficult to traverse and do all these other things. Whereas Cathay, a lot of the land is actually quite well tamed. The people of Cathay are able to spread out a lot more because of that, and they don't have as many natural threats because the Celestial Dragon Emperor and the Dragon Children have, quite frankly, crushed many of them. And then they did things like build the Great Bastion to keep out invasions from happening on a regular basis. They have a lot of really interesting defenses that we'll get into in a minute. But Wei-Jin is truly and utterly, absolutely freaking colossal, in a sprawling city-state type way. Unfortunately,
Can I just pop in and say, hopefully, Christian, I've just literally sorted that on my side. I'm bringing myself down to Sotek's level, hopefully. So
okay.
Can you double check if that's the case? And if it's not, tell me again. I'll bring my mic down a little bit further.
Yeah, and let me make sure. Oh, I don't have echo cancellation on as well. Let me know if that's better.
Oh, wow, what a difference. I'll put my volume back up.
Whenever we do a show that requires me to play audio from a video, I have to turn echo cancellation off, and I forgot to turn it back on, I guess, the last time we did that. So I'm probably much louder now.
Yeah, you are. Much.
So hopefully, I apologize to anyone's ears, but hopefully that'll even up the levels. So let me know if that's okay.
So thanks, Christian, for bringing that one up.
Yeah. So what's interesting to think about is when you compare Wei-Jin against the likes of, say, Altdorf, which realistically, Altdorf, I would say in the grand scheme of the world, is probably not that massive. Is it a gigantic city? Yes. But compared to Marienburg, some people say Marienburg is considerably larger. And then you have quotes about how Karatza could fit those cities within itself multiple times, quite easily. Though Karatza could also theoretically cheat because it goes down. But I would say that this is one of those cases where I genuinely believe that it is not an exaggeration nor inaccurate to say that Wei-Jin, as far as like non-ridiculous chaos magic shenanigans go, is probably the largest city on the planet.
I would make a small amendment to it, not because I'm going to disagree, because I'm actually going to agree completely, but because I know what Games Workshop is like. I would make a tiny amendment. My amendment would be, it is definitely the largest city inside the Warhammer world that we know of so far.
Yes.
It's that small extra clause that makes all the difference, because I think you'll find that as they very slowly and tentatively expand outwards into other parts of the Warhammer world, assuming that they ever do, and it does look likely that they will, we might find ourselves with a far bigger version of a city popping up in, say, Ind. We might find another version of a city popping up somewhere we just don't expect, perhaps in the Southlands, where they suddenly go, you know, that place that we said was, you know, this, actually, it's had thousands of years of history. Humanity itself might have actually come from here rather than from Albion or from elsewhere. Who knows what stories they will eventually spin? So be aware that the Warhammer world is an eternally evolving thing. But in this case, almost certainly, we have got ourselves not just the largest city potentially inside the entirety of the Warhammer world. We also have a city that has a history that spans back longer than most of the civilizations that the Warhammer world as a whole has. We don't have, I think, a very clear founding date that I'm aware of, but we do have a pretty clear founding date when Cathay became Grand Cathay, centered around all of what was there already. And we do also know that the dragons have been, let's say, fostering and protecting their human populations since the Cataclysm. It's very likely that this city is almost as old as the Warhammer world itself, in terms of everything from the Cataclysm onwards is considered to be the Warhammer world. It appears that it's as likely to be as old as the most ancient cities in Ulthuan. The most ancient cities, indeed, almost anywhere in the Warhammer world. So, without necessarily having the details to pin down a date on it, this city could be, well, as old as Warhammer, which is, I think, quite fun.
Yeah. And some of the interesting tidbits that we know about the city itself is that it's worth saying that the city, of course, lies on a really interesting fulcrum, where one of the things that we kind of have talked about, we mentioned it back when we talked about, when we did the episode on Altdorf, is that a lot of the great cities of the world, especially when they have really strong magical institutions, tend to be founded on really important magical nexus points. Whether they're like load points in the geomantic web, or there's something just very magically relevant going on in that particular area. If you're looking at like Mindenheim, which is probably both as well. And Wei-Jin very strongly falls under this, because it sits at a unique point where it is where the Dragon River, or the Spirit River of Souls, begins and makes its way out towards the ocean. And it's also where the Great Bastion started being built and moves its way out west towards the mountains. And both of these places are heavily empowered by magic from something we'll talk about in a minute. But it's this it's probably a very important point along the geomantic web, which stretches all over the planet. It's not just in Lustria, it's literally everywhere. And this city has two of, which we'll get into in a second, some of the most over the top but like still fun and grounded magical defense systems that exist within the setting.
Don't carry on.
I'll just finish this little descriptor of that with the river that flows out from the city. And likely there are quite a few mountains that Wei-Jin is kind of tucked into a series of mountains right behind it. We have some art that shows the city in a few different places within Total War, and also some of the art from like the art book, if you've ever had your hands on that, where Wei-Jin, it's not as quite as ridiculous as like Talabheim is, but it is kind of tucked up back against a bunch of very gigantic protective mountains that ring the outside of it. And then it has built outwards into the Imperial Road, or the like kind of the open plains that stretch out beyond it. So it's just built and built and built and built and built out.
What I particularly like about this whole situation is that we have ourselves the existing geomantic web that we are quite aware of. Now, you might be out there perhaps coming to some of our streams for the first time going geomantic web, WT and the F. Cut a very long story short, this is a web of, let's say, ley lines connecting magical nodes that spread across the world that were used by the old ones back in the day. And they have been used in turn by the successors to the old ones, the lizard men, as the Slan have attempted to both use and draw from and support the geomantic web that came from before them, and also by the elves to create a network of nodes to help suck magic from the world out into their vortex. And the reason that it's quite an interesting, let's say, addition, the city, after all, this lovely Cathayan capital, was added after all of these creations had already been added to the Warhammer world. But when they added this, they very clearly made it pretty much certain that the dragons and the old ones did not get on. They just didn't.
Mm-hmm.
The Cathayan dragons and the old ones were not pals. They were probably at war, and some form of potential truce was made at some point, or alternatively, the Emperor Dragon just went down below and hid. Whatever happened, eventually the Cataclysm rose, and the dragon, honorable creature that he was, eventually becoming Emperor, protected a bunch of humans who would become the Cathayans, who would eventually become the Grand Cathayans. Which means that everything that they're using is not a part of the existing network that's there. Suggesting that the reason that this is a city that is built in a fulcrum is because that's the way the dragons have made it. They have made their own fulcrum points. They have created their own dragon lines, which is a word that's sometimes used for the ley lines that spread across the Warhammer world. Dragon lines, which is in fact one that originates over in Cathay in terms of the use of it. It came across the World's Edge Mountains into Kislev, and Kislev used the word dragon lines for many of the lines of magic that was spread across Kislev. So we have ourselves a city.
I did not know that. That actually works really well.
Yeah, it is really well. It all links together. It's almost like it was thought about. So it comes across from Cathay, but I think it's probably likely that the geomantic web may never have really properly focused on where the city is now today, given that we get that feeling that possibly this is where the good old dragons that would one day found Cathay were originally nesting and holding themselves separate from the rest of the world, meaning that we might have something that lies outside of the geomantic web on purpose. Now, that is entirely debatable. We could also argue that with the removal of the old ones, they moved into a place of great magical strength to try and protect themselves when the cataclysm occurred and it all went very wrong. You could build either story with ease. What we can say for certain is that this city is at the heart of magical power, definitely. But given the nature of that magical power, the great bastion that spans in one direction, the rivers that are going in others, just the whole setup, it feels manufactured. Or alternatively, if you want a different reading, it feels like they've used the power there and then manufactured out from it. You could argue both sides. If you are wanting to make the dragons feel unique, though, which is often the route that is taken, they discard the gods, they were against the old ones, they have got knowledge that spans right back to pre-cataclysm times. So it seems more likely, on the evidence we have at hand, that they have built their own clean, blessed, divine version of the geomantic web that they have used to keep and cleanse Cathay from the worst that the winds of magic can offer. And indeed, they have been channeling the winds of magic for not just hundreds, but thousands of years in an almost clean fashion that allows them, with the balance of yin and yang, with the good compass in support as well, with what they built with the Great Bastion, to protect and keep clean all of Cathay. One of the reasons why their cities can be so big, the administration for those cities can be held in place. But it is worth noting that with that clean area, with the enormous populations, you're almost certainly going to have hubris. You're going to have those who are going to be open to being manipulated by the ruinous powers. There's going to be cults everywhere. So there's multiple ways that we could view the, let's say, magical fulcrum point that is this city. There are two primary and obvious ones, which is they adopted a part of the existing geomantic web, which is a very easy route and would be basically the same story as the elves. We took something that came before and repurposed it for our own purpose. Or alternatively, you could take what I think is the better option. They built this themselves, because if they were part of the geomantic web, they would almost also certainly be a part of the high elf plan to suck magic from the world.
So
because they cribbed on that.
I will add something that I think will support point 2 very, very strongly, where the dragons did not co-opt the geomantic web, they built something else. And that's because in Total War, with the lore they've been adding through Yuan Bo, we see when the dragons finally make their move to start taking over the geomantic web. Where Yuan Bo is the Jade Dragon, for those unaware. He is one of the eldest sons. We're not sure if he's the eldest son, but he's somewhere in among the older of the dragon children. And he, unlike the rest of his siblings, is kept very well in confidence with his parents as far as what they're up to. Because the Celestial Dragon Emperor and the Moon Empress are up to something. They've got their own plan that they're enacting. And Yuan Bo is the only one who knows little bits and pieces of it. He's known as kind of like the Grand Administrator of Grand Cathay, and he often portrays himself as merely a bureaucrat. But in reality, his kind of secret title is that he is the Emperor's executioner. He's the great spy master of Grand Cathay and is in charge of dealing with internal threats, while also he hands out like edicts and he interprets the will of his father and mother and passes those down as laws across the rest of Grand Cathay. The Empress and Emperor don't deal with day-to-day Cathay stuff pretty much ever. They are up to their own schemes, and they don't want to deal with the common humans and all this stuff. Like the Moon Empress cares a lot about them. Xin Yang is more heavily implied not really give a shit about humans. They're just useful tools to him. His wife cares about them, but that's kind of her more personal stuff. But Yuan Bo takes his parents' will and passes down laws that are like, my father says we will do this to enforce the concept of harmony, so we will do this. And like he passes laws on how cities are built and how they're organized and how people are allowed to advance in society. And it's a very strict regimented system. And he rules very strongly from Central Cathay, which is known as the Central Riverlands, where there's tons and tons and tons of rivers snaking out all across these like wide plains and wetlands where all of pretty much the food comes from. And it's kind of the breadbasket of Grand Cathay, and where a lot of the early civilization of Grand Cathay probably sprouted it up originally, because humans are very fond of setting up alongside rivers in ancient times. And yeah, and then but he spends a lot of time in Wei-Jin. Yuan Bo is the authority figure in Wei-Jin, and that is like one of his most central places of power, where he quite literally rules with an iron fist, to the point that, you know, what Andy was kind of talking about with like, oh, when you have such a big city with like, we're talking millions upon millions of humans and a lot of magic, because there's a ton of magic here, things are going to get a little bumpy. There's also a really fun note that Total War, of course, adapted, which is that in an older book, I want to say it was the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, I think it was Children of the Horned Rat, talks about that when Marco Polare, one of those two, Goofy, not Marco Colombo, because he was somewhere else. He was already busy, but a different Marco from Talea made his way to Grand Cathay and actually ran into Skaven while he was underneath the city of Wei-Jin, and that's still considered canon, where there are Skaven problems in an undercity beneath Wei-Jin. But for Yuan Bo, he has spies everywhere in the city, being the Onyx Crowmen, which we've talked about on a previous stream. If you go watch our stream on Yuan Bo and the Onyx Crowmen, where you have these literal elementals of yin that humans are naturally inclined not to notice because magic obfuscates them, constantly spying on people and quite literally killing them or removing them for interrogation if they prove to be nails that don't go down.
I think that there is a couple of things that are important to definitely.
Hold on. I got on a bit of a
okay.
tangent. Let me finish my quick thought, and then you can jump in there because I'll forget if I don't do it. So to Andy's thing earlier, one of the things which we'll talk about the compass, which supports it as well, is that the dragons do not come to the decision to start trying to manipulate the geomantic web and to suck the power from it until very, very recent in the timeline. It is their preparation step for the end times to try and dig into the geomantic web and redirect its power into the Wuxing compass, which and Yuan Bo kind of talks about that in some of his cinematics, where they're basically seizing the power, ancient power of the old ones, which they had not tampered with prior to that, and are trying to, almost like you're redirecting a power source with like electricity or whatever, redirecting it into the Wuxing compass to make it even more powerful in preparation for what is to come.
Yeah. Okay. So that pretty much clarifies it then. So my instincts were it's almost certainly not cribbed off of what was there before. And I think through the secondary sources that we have there, we can clearly state that we have ourselves a city that's this at the heart of a new geomantic web, for want of a better description, at the heart of dragon lines, if we want to use the language that's been used elsewhere. A new focus point for magic that has spread out from the compass itself, most likely, and is empowering a whole variety of Cathayan-based magical goodies. These are not directly tied to what the elves are doing, what the old ones did, what the lizardmen are attempting to do. This is a new web placed atop all the other webs. Now, will that web be at the, let's say, subject to the great vortex of magic that wipes magic from the world? And I think we've got a relatively clean answer that we can drop on this. No. And the reason that we have a no is because it was built after. It was built with an awareness that magic had been yanked out of the world, sucked out of the world by the, let's just simply call it, meddling of the elves. The elves have been doing stuff over in Ulthuan that sucked magic from the world, meaning that demons could no longer survive in the material plane on the Warhammer world. But it also meant that enormously magical creatures, like the dragons themselves, no longer had access to the magic that they had access to before. So for all they saved the world, they also endangered it to a degree, but in a different way, because the creatures like the sort of great Cathayan dragons no longer had the great magical wells that they could draw from sitting there. So it seems very likely that a reaction to the vortex is the creation of a second network of magic that they can use to concentrate, control, and manipulate the winds of magic before they get sucked away by the vortex. And it seems quite likely that that's loosely where we can start forming. When did it occur? Post-vortex. We have a problem. They no longer have as much magic as they used to have, so they start coming up with answers to the problems that they have directly in front of them, which will also include eventually building our great bastion. The whole thing slots together quite neatly there.
Yeah. So I think so as far as the city of Wei-Jin is concerned, because I think we're going to focus mostly on the Celestial City because there's a lot of crazy stuff going on up there. The big thing to say is that Wei-Jin, I would say very realistically, was built after the Celestial City, or maybe right before, and basically exists only to support the Celestial City, where you have the great ruling dragons and Yuan Bo himself way up there, where only basically the Shugengan are allowed. It's very, very rare for normal humans to be permitted entrance.
Shugengan, please do explain. I know, because I've actually been playing it, but there's many people out there who may not know. Oh, it's a rare one where I can say I know my Cathayan lore. Yeah,
so the Shugengan lords, they are dragon-blooded humans. So they are humans who are direct descendants of the dragon children, having offspring with human partners. And there are so many of them. And we've talked about it. If you want to check out our prior streams on just Grand Cathay or in Shadows of Change, we talk a lot about it, about how like the different dragon children probably approach it very differently as far as like how they feel about humans and how they have children and how they treat those children. But there are tens of thousands, if not way more of these Shukengans, because if they go on to have children, their children also are dragon blooded. But the lore seems to imply that the further diluted, so to speak, their blood is over generations, the less powerful they are, in the sense that the ones that are more closely related to the dragons are very powerful wizards, and also seem to live exceptionally longer and have abilities beyond humans.
I think a good model for that is, if you know it already, the Vampire the Masquerade, or any of the vampire games that came from White Wolf model, where you had the beginning vampire, in their case, generally espoused to be Cain, and your first generation, second generation, third generation, fourth generation from the source. And the further from the source you get, the weaker the powers become. But that in no way means that an 8th generation vampire, so 8 steps away from the source, is not freaking powerful in and of its own right. So that's a handy little model to give you an idea of where exactly it might come. But I would also say that, unlike the vampire model, we also have the possibility of cross-pollinating. And cross-pollinating is not necessarily the best word, but in that, maybe 4 or 5 generations down, they could then have a kid with one of the dragons, which would reinvigorate that particular bloodline, bringing it back to being a first generation with other dragon DNA in there as well, arguably making them more powerful than one of the older ones who may be further up the bloodline. So be aware, it's a bit complicated. It's probably more complicated than the war game will ever consider, because they don't need to worry about how it all works to make the Total War game work. They don't need to worry about how it all works to make Warhammer the Fantasy Battle game work. But if they ever do try to figure this out for the role-playing game side, they not only need to figure out how it works, they need to make rules for all of it. So the only time we'll ever likely get a proper answer for how this works is if the role-playing game actually concentrates on building up characters for these types of characters. But it's also possible that whoever writes that won't consider what it all means in practice too, and might just say, oh, it's just all the only ones who are first generation, isn't it? Because they just don't think it through very well. But I think from all of that, we can conclude that those who are the kids of the dragons with another human are enormously powerful individuals. These are individuals who have the ability to cast magic that is akin to the high lore masters of magic over with the elves. They are multiple wind casters. They are capable of doing really quite extraordinary things. And as the blood thins out from there, we're getting a variety of other spellcasters popping up as well. Perhaps not as powerful as those who are directly related to the kids, but we are going to have what are effectively witches and wizards all over the place in Cathay. And this has been happening pretty much since the dawn of Cathay, not Grand Cathay, but Cathay itself. It has been a part of their program right from the outset.
Yeah. So, with that, Wei-Jin, there's a lot of fun things to imagine about it. You have so many humans living there, and probably a fair number of other species might have quarters in various parts of the city, though not nearly as much as the port cities. Fushao is very much heavily implied to be where most of the non-humans in Cathay live, because they have these great dedicated areas for them to enjoy living in. And Cathay doesn't really like foreigners to go too far inland to potentially mess with things, but that's not going to stop people just being the way the world works. But you can imagine a city that's lined with all sorts of statuary that, of course, is very well established, can come to life. That is how Cathay defends a lot of aspects of itself, is they have their great terracotta sentinels, and they also have the jade lions and the jet lions that stand as guardian statuary that also come to life in reaction to certain kinds of threats, which would be simultaneously very wonderful to know that you have a silent guardian always watching over you, but also very terrifying because there's a silent guardian always watching over you.
The only other thing that I would add to the general description of the main city itself, which is what we're about to move on from, is that it's huge. And because it's huge, it is filled with problems, not just bureaucratic problems, not just the problems of people wanting power and jockeying for it, but with all the problems that come attendant with being a part of the Warhammer world. We have chaos cults everywhere. of all sorts. There's a reason that secret police is required by the dragons to try and patrol for these things. It's because they are everywhere. But don't think of them as the great enemy that lies behind it all, because they've got just their own people problems to deal with. Individual factions. The dragons won't be popular with everyone. There's going to be agitators who believe that things should be done in a different way, who believe that the dragons are literally unfair, particularly given that there is so much prosperity. Prosperity brings indolence, which brings a certain amount of upset people who think it should be done a different way. So there are going to be a lot of problems which are going to be relatively and draconianly put down. So be aware there's going to be a lot of civil unrest that doesn't necessarily, yeah, I did it on purpose, and that does not necessarily manifest very clearly in the lore, because they do put it down with such terrifying efficiency. But beyond that and all the chaos cults, we have all the other problems of the Warhammer world. There are Skaven, we have from at least one source, and probably more as time goes by, that have infiltrated and moved beneath. And we're not just talking Clan Eshin. We'll have other clans who are reportedly very big over in the east who pop up. So we're almost certain to have Clan Moors over there, Clan Rick. In fact, the more I think of Clan Rictus will be there. There'll be a bunch of clans. The city is just too big not to have underwarns beneath it. And it's also too big for the dragons to really keep control of everything, or indeed go down and under. It's not their natural area of warfare. So yeah, Skaven, issues with peoples, the possibility of other species that are there as well that no one's ever really dived into, because we haven't really developed all of this with the role-playing side of things yet. So we don't discuss other potential species that might be there. It's a big, huge human city that is filled with issues, and it takes constant work to keep it balanced, because balance is a core component of everything that runs through to the heart of Cathayan life. And that balance and ensuring that life is held in balance is a hard job. So be aware that this is huge, and that we could probably spend 1,000 years doing streams about what could be here.
Yeah, what ifs.
Yeah, but this stream is going to be much more about what we know is both here and in the Celestial City. And because the game requires it, much of what's been detailed here pops upwards towards the Celestial City and the rulership of Grand Cathay as a whole, and the great artifacts that help support the dragons do their job. So we're going to move away from this part and move up, but be aware that there is a lot we could discuss, but it would be from our side, mostly just making stuff up, because there's not a great deal of lore as of yet that lies beyond. It's big, man. There's a lot.
It's big, man. Yeah. All right. So let's get caught up on Super Chat stuff, and then we're going to head up
to the Celestial City.
Mandatus column. Before I forget, in delight of Friday's episode, Munch. Yeah, Friday's episode of LAWhammer was particularly, the ending was truly inspired. How do we deal with chaos? Munch. Just eat it. It'll be fine. Still loading. Howdy, good day. Why didn't Sigmar make Sentinels?
I could argue, I think I could answer that one quite cleanly. There was not the magical know-how or awareness to do so. Plus, by the time that our equivalent of Sentinels, our great guardians, have become a thing over in Cathay, they have got thousands of years, arguably, of experience for bringing these things to life without all the potential dangers that come along with that. They have the tech. They have much further along the tech tree on this matter than Sigmar and his crew ever were. They're basically back in the equivalent of barbarian times, doing barbarian things, with a host of benefits that they've gained from the dwarfs, who have aided their tech tree a little bit. But they're in just a very different place. Now, could we say that nowadays the Gold Order is in a position where they could start creating these things? Yes, but you have to also remember that there are cultural difficulties with this, because magic is not perceived to be a benefit by the vast majority of the populace. Meaning that whenever they do something big and flashy that's not supporting an army somewhere, everybody clamps down on them like a ton of bricks. They just don't like it. So the idea of something big and magical being brought in to support the Empire, whilst well within its remit and also completely, I think, a likely outcome, the chance of it actually occurring is pretty low.
Yeah, especially, yeah. if you read about Sigmar's history, he very reasonably did not have good experiences with magic. So, like, magical shenanigans were not encouraged for a very long time.
And you got to remember as well that Sigmar was constantly facing off against magical threats, be that Nagash, be that Azazel, be that whatever the heck it was that was getting thrown at him. Magic is not a good thing as far as most who follow Sigmar's way of life are concerned.
Magic shenanigans got his wife killed.
Yeah, exactly.
He took that very personally.
And I think he's potentially right to do so. And his cult has continued that on, meaning that the Empire as a whole, for all it has the arguably one of the most powerful institutes of magic in the old world, and I do mean arguably, I could make arguments elsewhere, it is still, nevertheless, one of the most anti-magic of all the old world nations.
Yep. Jaguar philosopher, ancient power awakened. We'll be discussing Yuan Bo today. Yes. We actually just talked about him a bit. Darius Rose, hi guys. After your Thrones of Chaos speculation, you ever thought of doing a monster tier list based on power wise, like Monsters, Infantry, Kaiju? Yeah, we can absolutely do that.
That could be fun, Darius.
Yeah. Tier lists are something we want to do on one of the Wednesday night streams, but it'll be after we finish the Termicon series.
Because tier list is too much fun for us to argue about, if anything else.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, those will be interesting. Darius Rose. Also, what would be categorized as an Emperor class dragon? Would the Dragon Children renovations fit into this? It would be interesting to debate over that because the Dragon quote unquote classification system was introduced kind of was heavily put forward in the Storm of Magic book, which was a very late addition to Warhammer Fantasy, and tried to add a system where there had kind of been vague hints beforehand, but it was very messy. And
I'll go further on that. Warhammer 3rd edition classified them neatly, with all the way up to Emperor Dragon, and it was proper daft. Basically, we just add more numbers on top. It was much like champion, hero, lord that you got throughout Warhammer systems at the time. So you had a basic troop model, you had a champion, you had a hero, and you had the lord level. Our Emperor Dragons being our lord level dragons. And you basically turned dragons into a basic troop unit, for want of a better description, going all the way up to lord. This was classic Warhammer. It's how Warhammer did everything back in the 3rd edition. As we then moved into the 4th and 5th edition, this continued, but they removed the upper levels for most monsters and similar. As we moved into later editions, they started adding varieties and bigger versions of monsters again, until eventually we arrived back at Storm of Chaos, where they do full circle and they give you the tiered system all the way back up and add a completely new set of rules on top of that for their names and similar. So, to keep it very simple, these are Lord tier dragons. That's basically what they are. They're the top tier dragons. And that keeps it nice and simple for us. Who cares what name they're given? If they were given a name, sure, you could try and call them Star Dragons. What the heck you want to try and call them? Doesn't matter. They are the top tier dragons of the world. And in Cathay, there's nothing bigger. There's nothing more impressive than them. If you were to turn them into Warhammer stats, it's very likely that they would slightly break the game. And we'd end up with a Galrauch situation where we have ourselves the equivalent of a top tier dragon giving the stats of an absolute idiot. If you want more on that, go watch our Galrauch stream. Sorry, Galrauch. Go watch our Galrauch stream, where you'll realize that Galrauch should have stats that completely wipe the floor with everybody, but don't. And that's one of the issues with Warhammer in general.
Yep. Ascended Overlord, I wanted to ask about the rivers of Cathay and whether they're all man-made or not. They reach all the way to the west side of Cathay. I think you mean the east. I mean, the origin points are very heavily west, but that leads them all back up to the mountains, and the highlands and stuff like that, and then they flow out towards the sea.
The basic geography means that they would have almost certainly existed, whether they were helped along the way or not. Water drains from mountains down through flat areas towards the sea. Now, if you hit very hot areas, it's possible that you might end up draining into an area that just evaporates. That can happen. But Cathay has enough biomes in place that you could very easily have a river that wends for what is in our world an almost infeasible length. It's really, really long. But there are multiple rivers in the real world, particularly some of them that are kicking over Russian side, which are truly stupendously large. And I'm not just talking our Amazons. Even the good old US has got some particularly long rivers that eventually drain out towards the south of the US. So be aware that this is not in any way geologically infeasible. It is completely normal for a world to drain the way that Cathay does. I would argue actually that it's actually, if anything, missing a ton of areas where rivers probably should be. But that's not uncommon for the Warhammer world, where the Warhammer world, when it deals with its water systems, tends to just draw a couple of rivers that they think would rock and then move on until someone comes in later, a cartographer whose job it is to try and make sense of it all, and goes, okay, there is nothing draining this large basin. I'm going to have to add a river, and end up having to contact whoever it is that's handling the license, or Games Workshop themselves, and say, can I add a river here? And they generally go, no. Oh, crap.
Yeah.
Crap.
Yeah, and yeah, I would probably look at like river maps of like China over the millennia where those have been recorded, and kind of do some quick comparisons to Grand Cathay and see what amounts of inspirations are there. But generally speaking, like some of them could very well be man-made. Especially like to connect various rivers that were already there, and like they dammed some of them and did some other stuff. I mean, human interference is going to happen all the time.
I argue, in fact, that to help channel the winds of magic in a fashion that means that it won't all get yoinked out by the good old vortex, that some of the rivers will be purposefully rechanneled to move the Gyron from one place to another to attach into what the dragons themselves want to use the winds of magic for. So I think that there are going to be dragon-made, rather than man-made per se, rivers in multiple places in Cathay where it is being used to better channel the winds. And some of them will also be repurposed to encompass and hold other winds. Like, for example, if you want to hold Shyish. Shyish is a particularly difficult wind to move from one place to another that's not directly tied to death or the passing of one thing into another. Encompassing it in another wind and creating a funnel, and that could just be a river to move it down, suddenly turns your river from being a lovely little place of life and spreading out life into a river of screaming death. And that is something that the dragons that are particularly aware of how the winds work will be looking to try and manipulate. So I think the answer will be yes, a lot of it will be restructured according to their needs and whims.
Does Great Compass tap into the geometric web? We actually just talked about this a bit. We believe the answer is no until Yuan Bo starts forcing it to.
Yeah.
Which causes the lizardmen to react not nice. And it also explains why Yuan Bo invades Lustria, which makes for a really fun storyline. Metaganon, didn't the Shadow of Change storyline say Yuan Bo is the second oldest spirit dragon? Excuse me, goodness. Yes, but there are a lot of various issues with that story that are heavily contradicted by other notes that come later. And generally speaking, it kind of seemed like they could have given a little more direction to the author about like various notes in the story and made sure to double check everything that was in it. Because there are several things that he says that don't line up with the very heavily, shall we say, watched over material. So I would say that Yuan Bo probably is the second oldest, but I think that Miao Ying's actually probably the oldest as opposed to the spirit dragon. Because that story suggests that the spirit dragon died before any of the dragon children knew her, and literally every single other source disagrees with that. So, yeah. Tiblam, bit out of subject, but is it possible that the huge meteor of warpstone used by Cathay to kill the ogres was in fact a Morslip type residue of Portal of the Old Ones, like from the Southern Gate? Had that question since the Maw stream. It's certainly possible. I would not say it's impossible. Like the idea that warpstone technology or warpstone is like old one tech that's like crystallized in some fashion due to extreme amounts of like dar, however you want to swing it. That is a very, very feasible theory that could work very easily.
Yes, I completely agree. Thanks very much for the super chat, by the way. I completely agree. This is one of multiple potential readings. During the Maw stream, we had a variety of potential readings there, some of which were preferred over others, because inevitably we start building theories that we like personally. You can't help yourself whenever you've got an area that's not got an answer. But this particular one is a definite potential for the different options that are available.
Yeah, and considering like its sheer size, there is like kind of an implication that there was something unusually special about it. Watchdog 3079. What do you think would arise if magic was corralled by Kalor's maelstrom? Of when magic was corralled with the maelstrom, it did not fragment and refract into its many discordant hues.
Oh, this is a nice old world piece of lore now.
Yeah, that's a big old what if scenario.
Okay, so I have a not an opinion on this, but I definitely have a view. And that's that if you accept the lore that's placed by the old world, then the winds fragment post after the cataclysm rather than they were that way before or during. However, we have multiple, not just one or two, we have multiple examples in the lore where the winds of magic exist beforehand. And I'm talking scores and possibly even hundreds of tiny examples spread around different books. I've written some, so I know that at the very least there's one or two where, for example, Ulgu is marked as existing during the last battle of the Elven Gods. And if Ulgu exists then, the Sword of Judgment exists then the Grey Wind brutally exists then. So I think that the answer here is that perhaps perceptions of various mortal creatures had changed to the point that the fragmentation of the winds became more clear to them, but that the winds themselves did exist to one extent or another beforehand as well. So I think that the easiest way, if you wish to try and rationalize it in a very simple black and white way, is to think of it this way. The Aether, the magical realm that lies beyond, the place that's not in the material realm, has no time. So the winds always existed. That's just how it works. It's just that it was the creation of the vortex which made them manifest cleanly within the material realm. But beyond that, you can pretty much make up anything you want. We have a clear piece of lore now that says, come the end of the cataclysm, everybody understood magic differently. I think that's fine. But I think that simply saying that the winds didn't exist before then doesn't match up with existing lore. And until Games Workshop repeat it 5 times, it hasn't really happened yet. It's a little bit like, I don't know, the Candyman. You got to say it multiple times before it comes.
Oh man, there's a reference.
Or Bloody Mary. You have to say it multiple times before it's real.
Yeah,
it's one book. It's a theory.
Yeah, Lidor. For me, thank you very much. By the way, for me, the combo of the Great Bastion, the compass, and the river kind of felt like a dam, where you have the wall being the compass as a generator, and then the river deals with the excess, probably powering its defenses, interacting with some way with Cathay and Afterlife. We will talk about that in literally just a moment. There's a lot of truth there, but luckily we have some really cool details there. Chaos trying to be like, please nerf Bastion. yeah, they are. Seth, the whooshing compass seems to pull energy from Feng Shui. It might use geomancy and pull elemental energies to organize the winds of magic and the population. Yes, there's literally not a pun, but like it's not a pun, but a reference to that where it talks about that yang magic in Grand Cathay. It's like more appropriate name is the art of Feng Shi, not Feng Shui. So they just got rid of the U. But it is reference. It has more to do with yang magic specifically, which yang magic has a lot of geomantic elements to it.
I mean, the entirety of the organization of Cathay is built to support what they're doing. So I think the answer to that is bluntly, kind of yes.
Kind of, yeah. Inquisitor Thomas, Yuan Bo, you can't go too far into the heartland of Cathay. Gelt, if you didn't want me governing Shangwu, then you probably should have had a dual start in as the AI faction. You just left the city open for me, man. I don't know what you want.
Honestly, when I played, man, I was like, fuck off, Gelt. Get out of my fucking cities. And he's like, I control all of this now. What the hell are you doing here? It was like he was purposely sent to torment me. Fuck that guy. Man.
Everyone's looking over at Zhao Ming. Get your boyfriend out of here. Fucking Yibby. I wish GW got Warhammer Fantasy to collaborate with some different kinds of games for collab out. That would be cool. Games Workshop has a lot of potential opportunities lying around where they're starting to kind of leaning into collaborating with other countries. Though granted, they're almost always doing it through a 40K lens. But never say never. That being said, I've seen you on a lot of different Warhammer content creator streams. So, keep fighting the good fight, my dude.
I don't want them to create a gacha game for Warhammer because I like my money.
It's okay. I don't think you'd like those games.
No
But-
gacha game for Warhammer because I will be poor and that would be rubbish.
Yep. Jackie Sinclair. Let's do with Wei-Jin more the Bastion itself. What did the Dawi think about the Bastion, how it interacts with magic? Is there a Dawi hole around Cathay? Maybe engineers to study the Bastion. So the furthest east dwarf holds we know of are in the Mountains of Morn, and there's very little lore about them because the ones we do know about all got obliterated, but there's some mentions that there are hidden ones still around in those mountains to this day. As far as what do the dwarves think of things like the Great Bastion, unfortunately, we don't know. That hasn't been written yet, but there could be a really fascinating concept there of the dwarves dealing with the Cathayans. It would be interesting to see how the dwarves would react in the sense that the Cathayans use magic in a lot of their construction. They almost use it in the way that the Empire uses blessings, which, if you know your little bits about how the Warhammer world works, is not that is basically just magic, but just viewed through a different cultural lens. But dwarves use runes to empower many of their constructions. Now, whether the dwarves would realize that it's very similar, or whether they would have a psychological disconnect because someone uses the word magic and wizardry type things, would probably depend on the dwarf and how educated they are on the finer details.
Yeah, I'm not so sure it would be much of an issue. I mean, the dwarves are not anti-magic. The dwarves just don't use magic because they can't. They just literally can't. It's not a part of how dwarven physiology works. And when they do, in those rare instances when it becomes a thing, they turn to stone. It's just not really the dwarfy thing. So I don't think it's necessarily a cultural lens that's going to cause the issue. I think here it's purely geography. And I think that if there was a runesmith that had arrived at the Bastion and was having himself a lovely little chinwag, there'd be all manner of exciting chat that they could have. I think that, indeed, if I were creating Cathay, I would certainly have myself a small dwarf population close to and working, not necessarily with, but certainly to understand what's going on here, because they would be fascinated, I think, as a species. It's something that's really, really impressive. It's an enormous work, a truly pinnacle of engineering. That alone would be enough to just make the dwarves just nod and go, for Umgi, this is freaking impressive.
Yeah, honestly, I think there'd be more chin wagging for the dwarf, or like disapproving, like from the dwarves about the aspect of like the dragons building much of this, more than like magic being used to build much of this, because it would force the dwarves to confront some of their assumptions about dragonkind.
I think it would be fair to say that I think it would be I think the Cathayan dragons are as akin to Western dragons as elves are to humans. They look the same. If you look at them at a distance, they're very similar, but Cathayan dragons are effectively a completely different species. Look how different they are. They don't have the same physiology. They in no way look the same. They are basically an entirely different entity. Plus, as we know, they're also, for the vast majority of them, half not dragon anyway. They're half shapeshifter. So they're just not the same species. And I think that very quickly the dwarves would go, yeah, they're not dragons. They're not dragons as we understand them. They are Cathayan stroke dragons, or whatever they wish to call. Dragon is nothing more than the word that is used by the peoples of the old world to describe them. In no way are they going to be perceived as the same thing.
There would be some very interesting things about like dwarves first arriving in Cathay and hearing about dragons and making a lot of assumptions, and that causing some really hilarious, I mean quite literally hilarious, cultural conflicts of the dwarves having all these sayings and wisdoms and notes about dragons, and the Cathayan people finding them highly offensive, which leads to shenanigans. But I think over the many hundreds, if not thousands of years since, I would go so far as to say the dwarves would probably have like a completely different term in Cosmology, just like they do for like many different forms of gold. They would probably have very, very different terminology for Cathayan dragons, which once again could lead to fun shenanigans of the Dwarven ambassador or dwarves that have traveled to Cathay coming back to the World's Edge Mountains and telling the other dwarves about it, and those dwarves going, "That's bullshit. That's the dragons that are not dragons. That sounds absurd." But anyway. Phil, oh my lord. Wow. Why did Shenyang place his palace so close to the northern border? The region Beijing came in capital so far from the north because the city was ruled by former Norman. Also, for the record, the book I was referring to was a collection of grudges engendered by the travesty of the entire. Yes, Andy and me having our own book of grudges would make canonical sense. I will say, the reason Shenyang put his stronghold so far in the north, I will say flat out, is because he built them in a defensible position as far north as he could because he needs as much of the winds of magic as possible.
Yeah.
And the winds come from the north. He wanted to grab as much of that in that net he was building as he possibly could.
I mean, this speaks to exactly why the city is placed where it's placed. And I think it is very easy for us, particularly those of us who view the idea of a compass as sitting at the center. Absolutely not. That's just not how it works. It is at the center of the web that they are using to spread the magic around, but it is absolutely not at the center of Cathay. That's just not how it works. And the further north you go, the more the winds of magic can be captured before it's moved out towards the vortex by what was the great geomantic web and has now been cribbed upon by the elves. What I find more interesting is, did the elves ever get into Cathay to reinforce the geomantic web in those early years? And has it been dismantled by the Cathayan dragons, which seems relatively likely, which means there's a huge chunk of the world where magic is not properly dissipated by the vortex, but is instead controlled and channeled by the Cathayan dragons, which is kind of cool.
Are we encouraged to Wei-Jin on the subject? Always. Thank you. Given that the Emperor and Empress are from a time before the Polar Gates, would they actually prefer the world with less magic post-vortex? Probably not. They're probably like most of the dragons who are not super happy with the state of the world now.
Yeah, the post-vortex world does not seem to be anything like the pre-vortex world. Don't think the vortex brought it back to a norm. The vortex changed everything. It turned the world into a world where magic was no longer there in comparison to what it was before. Consider what it was like during the Cataclysm, where demons could live everywhere. It's just different is the answer.
Yeah. Roderick appearing to say hello, lovelies. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. EJ, Dan, when you think about Cathayan astromancers should put most blue wizards to shame given the difference in time for magical research. Yeah.
Agreed.
Cathayan wizards would probably
agreed.
Yeah.
There's no other way.
Would probably dunk on a lot of Empire wizards pretty heavily a lot of the time. That being said, there is a lot of really strong evidence and a really fun way to suggest that the Imperial colleges that are outlawed forms of magic in Cathay would be far beyond what Cathay understands of those particular winds of magic in certain circumstances.
Again, I think that you're attempting to compare chalk with cheese here. They're two very different things. Their understanding would be far deeper, obviously, but that doesn't mean they make better war wizards. The colleges of magic create war wizards who specialize on war. And that's it. So the Astromancer might have a breadth of skills that do all sorts of stuff. And then the Celestial Wizard comes along and eats them for breakfast because he is designed to kill. He is a weapon. And the Astromancer isn't. The Astromancer is, if anything, an intellectual by comparison. The Celestial Wizard would probably destroy him. So you'll find that when it comes to what they do in the Warhammer table, they will be tit for tat.
Yeah, and that's actually, imagine thinking of like someone who's like an absolute master in smithing and understanding everything there is to understand a sword versus the guy who's trained his entire life on how to stab people with said sword. He may not understand necessarily how to make it or a lot of various aspects about it, but he knows how to kill you with it. Also, the Yangtze and Yellow Rivers are huge IRL. Yeah. Could a Cathayan dragon kid have a kid with an old world dragon?
Maybe. I think the answer is probably not. They seem to be different species, in the same way that elves and humans are very different. They can't have children unless chaos is involved.
Yeah.
I think that the answer would probably be the same here. They're not going to have kids unless chaos is involved.
The Moon Empress absolutely could.
Shapeshifters. They are shapeshifters at heart, so the answer could be, you know what? Actually, yes.
Yeah. Do you think Neferata has ever been to Wei-Jin, or could she not even get in? I bet she could if she wanted to.
Yeah,
it's fucking Neferata. She is like one of the greatest subterfuge masters in the setting.
So as I was saying earlier, the capital of Cathay has all the same problems that all other large population centers.
Oh yeah, there's going to be Lamians in Wei-Jin.
So there's going to be vampires there, probably of an eastern breed, and there's also likely to be some equivalent to the Lamians doing horrible Lamian stuff too. And they will be doing everything in their power, and by they I mean the dragons, to stamp that out. But that in no way means it doesn't exist.
Yeah, also go check out our Vlad stream for a lot of our thoughts about Cathay and vampires, because we actually talk about that a fair bit there. Just an idea to throw it out. It's very likely the dragon children are not as harmonious as Pappy and Mummy. I see the Shugengan lineage is closer blend to harmony due to human adaptability. Yeah, the dragon children fight constantly.
Yeah,
we've talked about it in some of the prior streams. There's literally an age called the Age of Darkness and Disharmony where Mom and Dad left and the dragon children immediately fell to infighting.
Yep.
Even though there's only 5 of them. Like they
remember that the ideal that is often presented as this is what Cathay is like is an ideal. It is not what it actually is like on a day-to-day life basis. For example, the Empire is the most powerful old world nation. It can stomp everyone, except it can't. It just can't. It's not that powerful, and it's also broken internally with a whole bunch of different factions doing different things that war with each other. But nevertheless, that doesn't mean they're not the most powerful nation in the old world. Yeah, it's a complicated state of affairs.
Yeah, a question from Thomas. I suppose the question is, how many eggs do dragons lay in Warhammer? Miao-Yin could be the eldest, but she only hatched like 30 seconds before Yuan Bo.
So, don't know the answer to that one. Indeed, I pitched this one directly to Andy Hoare some time ago, and his answer was, I'm not even sure they have eggs. So, that was an interesting response. Yeah, but they literally said, where do the dragon kids come from? Where do their kids come from? Do they have eggs? And he was like, I don't know.
Yeah, we do know Shin Yang came from an egg because there's like a whole thing about the egg he came out of. There's like a giant amount of lore about his emergence from an egg. But so
cool story,
his children probably came from eggs. But I mean, their mom's a shapeshifter. So I mean, their mom's a shapeshifter, but she also shapeshifted into what Jin Yang is. So like, I don't know.
Who can say for certain is the answer to that one?
Yeah. Tyrant 25, how much do we have to donate to Andy's Patreon to get him to have Gelt come in out of nowhere and save the day at the climax of The Enemy Within?
I'm not sure you're rich enough, Tyrant 25. I mean, you can try, but I'm not sure you'll
have to offer. It probably is like his own island in a very solid climate. Is the Dragon Emperor the first one to invent gunpowder? No, the Dragon Emperor had very little, if any. He probably has nothing to do with gunpowder at all. That was the creation of the humans of Nangao, who are humans that do human things, and like they're not merely automatons of the dragons. They're humans doing all sorts of crazy stuff. There's actually a lot of really funny things hidden and talked about throughout the lore of that Yuan Bo. Whenever the humans do something new, he has to have it brought before him at the Palace of Scrolls, and there has to be a debate and an argument where he decides whether or not to approve whatever it is the humans have gotten up to, or whether to say, no, this is disharmonious, you must stop, and you cannot do this any longer. That's a huge aspect of his job that genuinely brings him no end of annoyance, because the humans are constantly doing shit, which is really funny to think about. One weakness of the Bastion according to Total War. Let's build a small city in front of the gates with much smaller walls that can be easily breached. It's a video game. They have to make it like
fun.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah, realistically, there would probably be small areas where you're able to get through the walls that could potentially be attacked, but the Great Bastion it's basically never fallen. It's only had holes punched in it by like certain kinds of disasters, where then the hordes of chaos pour through. And those are really, really bad, obviously. But in a video game, if you have a wall that is not supposed to fall the entire game, well, that's pretty fucking boring.
Heck, it's a video game for the end time, so it does fall. Grimgor eats it.
Yeah, Grimgor. Yeah, he just one swing. He just
never gonna get
with his axe, and it just breaks apart. Fantastic call. Cathay being a land where magic isn't funneled like the rest of the world would make sense as to why it's full of floating pinnacles and giant robots everywhere.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Indeed, that to my own head, that's a large chunk of why it is the way that it is.
Morning Crescent, would it be possible to map out how magic portion of the poles is pulled through the vortex and known spots of the various winds pull flows? Is it possible? Yes. It actually wouldn't probably be that hard. It would just take a little bit of, you'd have to sit down and take it. But if you read certain aspects of the lore, there are pretty well designed little like maps and stuff that kind of give you an idea of how it works. But the world kind of has a vacuum funnel that funnels all the magic into the vortex, with the exception of Grand Cathay, which we're kind of talking about now, which is fun. Phil, so immortal and seemingly nigh incorruptible rulers, extremely powerful magic great engineering feats. Is the Empire Sigmar just a pushover to the might of Grand Cathay?
Yes. But the
Yep.
problem with the mighty Grand Cathay is that it's pushing off against everything else as well. If it were able to bring all of its forces to bear, sure, but it can't. It's too big. There's too much that will face off against it. It's in a state of constant war. The empire over in the old world is tiny, which is why, for me, it seems ridiculous that the Age of Sigmar game effectively was the age of this tiny part of the world becomes more important than anything else. It's actually crazy to me. But that's the way Games Workshop did it. They chose their big white guy to be big white guy God King, which to me was just mental. But I fully accept,
it's easy.
I mean, the Empire is just one part of the old world, and the old world itself as a whole is smaller than Grand Cathay. It's craziness. So the answer is, Phil, yeah, of course. The Empire is just a tiny faction. It's not that important. It's not that big. It's not that special. But in turn, Grand Cathay is too big to wield like that, and it has too many enemies to be able to be wielded. Nippon has beaten it multiple times. The Ogre Kingdoms have beaten it multiple times. Various folks around them have beaten them multiple times. And if you go by Total War, fucking Gelt takes over half of Cathay.
Yeah, he's just helping out. He does help.
Yeah.
What do you think happened to the rest of Zhen Yang's Eastern Dragonkin? That is an interesting question that I want to get back to the main topic of the stream, so I'm just gonna say that there
could be a one-off.
Yeah, he could be the only one. And the rest of them, like, what happened to Zhen Yang's parents? Where does he come from? Great question. Who knows? They're probably maybe they're all dead. Who's to say? Do you think the Shugengan eggs taste good scrambled? I can tell you for a fact the Shugengan do not come from eggs. They are born as human babies because they are humans with dragon blood. They are not dragons that turn into humans. So they are all human. They just have a little bit of dragon in their blood, in their genetic code, but not enough to change. Like, though it would be funny to like play around with the idea that there are physical features of some of them that are a little odd. Cathay and Astromancer, guy with PhD in trigonometry, Empire Blue Wizards, highly trained sniper.
I mean, you could argue that, but I think that it's a little bit more developed than that. Most Blue Wizards, after all, tend to be old guys in gullers up in towers reading the stars, but they are still, when it comes to being at war on the battlefield, quite extraordinary.
Yeah. So the Celestial City, getting back to, there's a lot of questions y'all have asked that are really, really cool and stuff, and now I can actually genuinely answer them and sit down with this. So the Celestial City, as we talked about, is a grand palace complex floating in the air above Wei-Jin. And the only way to get to it, fun fact, if you're not a flying dragon, is that there's this giant mountain that looks like the talon of an unfathomably large dragon that reaches up towards the city. And at the very point of this mountain, the Celestial City hovers just a little bit away from it. So there's like a system that was designed so that certain kinds of items and people who can't fly can be ferried across this little mountaintop to the Celestial City, which also means it's a pain in the ass to get to. But you know, the dragons like their flying city. Now, the core thing, the most important, undeniably thing in like all of Grand Cathay, to be frank, is the Wuxing compass, which we've talked about a bit heavily in the past during like our kind of more broad Grand Cathay episode, which is this big old magical construct that, when it's talked about in depth, the Celestial City is not just a floating rock. A lot of it is hollow and is full with the various mechanical and magical components that make the compass work. Like, it is frankly Shen Yang's masterpiece, and is a grand design that is the foundation point of Grand Cathay. Everything else that is important for Grand Cathay, like the Bastion, the River of Souls, all of that feeds off of the Great Compass. Would not be possible without the compass. And it sits there in the floor of the throne room for the Emperor and Empress, sucking up the winds of magic and then separating it traditionally into yin and yang, which yin is half of the winds of magic, yang is the other half of the winds of magic. With yang being, oh gosh, see if I can remember off the top of my head. Yang is It's fire, metal, light, and I think heavens. Yes, yeah, that's right. And then yin is
Amethyst.
no, no, that's not right. Metal is it's life. Sorry, switch life and metal. So yeah, so it's life, heavens, fire, and what was the other one I said? Life, heavens, fire, and oh my god, my brain. I said it. What?
Heaven.
I already said heaven.
Did you? Pardon me.
Heaven, fire, life,
Light.
and light. There we go. Light. Yeah. And then yin is the other four being shadow, death, metal, and whatever the other one is. Beast. So, and the way those winds are traditionally directed is that the yang winds are poured into the Great Bastion, which allows the Great Bastion to remain strong and resolute and impenetrable, and is why it is so durable and able to hold out against a lot of things. It also talks about that the Great Bastion, according to lore, is built so high, and because of the yang magic radiating off of it, it prevents the winds of magic from going over it. The winds of magic slams into the wall and is ideally redirected into the compass or scatters off into the east or back north. But one of the things that's really interesting about the compass, the Wuxing compass, is that we know that a key. This is going to lead into a funny joke that a lot of people say all the time. It has a lot to do with magnets, because magnets, how do they work? But magneticism plays a huge role in the functioning of the compass, along with many of its other components, to the point that the war compasses, which are smaller iterations of the Wuxing compass that can be driven out into battle and they like suck in the winds of magic to itself. One of the fascinating things that's talked about within the game that makes the big compass potentially even more terrifying is that in moments of dire need, the magnets can have their polarity reversed, which causes the compass to send magic out in like a big kaboom, like pulse type situation. But it's kind of an emergency only type situation where the little ones are able to use it to basically redirect anything that's coming at the compass. It just like scatters everything to protect the compass. But if you were to use it on the actual Wuxing compass, the results would probably be devastating. But as for the yin magic, all of the yin magic is funneled into the River of Souls, which, because it is so heavily saturated with yin magic, makes it literally impossible to cross. Anyone who tries to cross it, canonically, will arrive on the other bank of the Dragon River dead, because their souls get ripped out of them and pulled down into the river. And you can't even fly over it. It's that deadly. Because there's just this magical effect that draws everything into it. And then in the depths of the river is sleeping Shiyama, the spirit dragon or the death dragon, and within whose dreams, whatever that necessarily entails, the Cathayan underworld exists, and the ancestors of the people of Cathay are kept around forever, seemingly, which is fascinating and also mildly terrifying.
Yeah, on both counts. I think it's also worth adding at this point that it's very easy to start perceiving Cathay having its own cosmology almost. It runs everything differently. It takes the winds of magic and turns it into something else. They even use the winds in different ways. And I'll broadly say that's a nonsense, because I've heard it mentioned by multiple commenters and on various threads at points that Cathay is just different. It isn't. It's taking the existing cosmology that we know and using it in different ways, sure, but these are ways that have been brought up in multiple different similar ways by other cultures, by their factions, by their species across the Warhammer world. I'll give a single example. Yin and Yang as an idea is not Cathayan alone. It pops up in multiple places, and I'll give you one that you may not be aware of. It's at the very core of the High Elves. The symbol, the black and white symbol, is a High Elf symbol. It represents their primary god, Azurin. If you look through any of the old High Elf books, you'll find literal yin and yang symbols all over them, because it's the bifurcated mask, half white, half black, of Azurin, primary emperor deity of the High Elves. Indeed, the entirety of the Elven pantheon is split now into two discrete halves, the Kadai and the Kaithari over on the other side, and those two halves split along the yin-yang divide as well. Yin-yang is very much a core concept of the Warhammer world, a split between one type of expression and another, without going into any great details with them. The Cathayans take this to an extreme in one direction, where other cultures and factions and species across the Warhammer world take them to different extremes and use them in different ways. But don't think that yin and yang is a purely Cathayan concept, and they are doing things differently here to elsewhere. This is something that has been a core part of the Warhammer world since pretty much 3rd edition. And the Cathayan representation of this is nothing more than an adaptation of everything that's come before and just reimagining it for a different culture. So don't think that what's happening here in Cathay is somehow new. It isn't. It slots in beautifully with everything else that goes out there. And if you take a look at even the tiny bits of lore we have for the Nipponese or the Cathayans, the High Elves and elsewhere, you'll find these concepts appearing again and again and again.
Yeah, so there is something that's really, really interesting up in the Celestial City, because it's not just, so being a palace, it has 2 additions. Though I want to note that I am taking a little bit of a leap here in that presumably these structures are in the Celestial City based on what's talked about with them. It could be they're down in Wei-Jin. It's not 100% clear where exactly these 2 things are, but they're fascinating and I do want to talk about them. The first is there is a special location, I believe, within the Celestial City, because it's not just the palace, it's a full complex that's got like gardens and a bunch of other really fancy things and living quarters and some other stuff. And it's called the Temple of the 2 Moons. And the Temple of the 2 Moons is a sacred place that it's a full-on temple, but there is an inner chamber that is one of, if not the most protected place in Grand Cathay, because within it there is the origins and the truth behind the magical concepts of yin and yang, both magically and philosophically, and maybe even in some more dangerous aspects. And the only people that are allowed within this chamber are the dragon-blooded people who are direct descendants of the dragons, in that the Shugengan, this is where they must go. It is the final step in their journey to master yin or yang. Because they have to learn all 8 of the winds of magic. They have to learn how to wield high magic, and then once they have successfully wielded high magic, they are then brought into this temple to go through the final steps to learn and master either yin or yang. Nobody seems to wield both. Like even the dragon children, it is, I think Yuan Bo is the only dragon who might wield both. I can't remember if he has yin spells. I don't think he does. I think he only has yang and then some other random lores. But someone correct me on chat if I'm wrong about that. But it is fascinating to consider what the hell could be in that chamber, because the name Temple of the 2 Moons opens up a lot of really interesting thoughts, because they're kind of acknowledging Morslib within that, which is a bit unusual for Cathay.
I love this a little bit, because I remember when I first encountered it, my first thought was, right, so what does that say about the Emperor? Is there a reason we don't see him that much these days? Did something happen during the Cataclysm which put the Emperor in a slightly different place? Is there a reason that we don't have more kids that have been created post the Cataclysm? Is there a reason all the dragon kids are so old and the Emperor's had none since then? You know what? I think the answer might be yes. And it doesn't matter what the reason is. We are aware that at the very heart of all of Cathayan civilization is this idea of balance that runs right up to the very top, with the Emperor and the Empress representing both yin and yang in their own ways. And with our look at their yin and yang and their both ways as well, and the 2 moons, we've got obviously Mansleep represented by the Empress and the Emperor, Morsleep. And that, I think, is reinforced by this location, that the Emperor should be understood through the lens of Morrslieb. And you could argue differently if you wish to do so, but I think you would be going against one of the core issues with Cathay as a whole, and that's that it's too perfect. Cathay as a whole doesn't fit into the Warhammer world as it currently stands. There is a secret that has yet to be told. There is a problem with this place. The reason that Cathay falls apart in the end, why didn't the Emperor just come down and eat everyone in the end times? There's a reason. And this is our first very clear idea as to what has gone wrong with Cathay. And that's that potentially at the very heart of it, we have a Chaos Dragon or some equivalent. We have something that's gone wrong. We have a reason why the Emperor and the Empress are very rarely seen. We have a proper problem. Think about, for example, what happens with, is it called Last Kingdom? I think it is over on Netflix. Is it called that? The Korean drama, anyway, where the Emperor goes very wrong there. And we effectively find ourselves in Last of Us territory as everything goes super, super wrong because there's something wrong at the top. There has to be something wrong with Cathay. Now, I'm not saying that it's the Emperor. I'm categorically not saying that. But I'm saying if you were to write it and take a look at everything that currently is there, there is clearly a very strong implication that the Emperor is tied to Morrslieb and that the Emperor has had no more children. Why? And then you get the idea that the Emperor is being hidden, is being secreted away, and very possibly that the entire place is in a state of imbalance. Everything is not right because the Emperor is no longer capable of doing the things the Emperor should be doing. There's a host of cool stories you could write about this. But at its heart, we've got a really cool location, which is obviously, the Two Moons Temple. And we've got ourselves this idea that all of the dragons are passing through here. But behind it, you get the obvious implication that one of those moons is the Emperor's, represented by the Emperor. What?
Yeah, the thing that's super interesting thing about, which thank you everyone in chat, and I did double check it, that Yuan Bo uniquely does wield yin and yang. He's the only character that does in the setting, but he's also the balanced child. One of the things that's super interesting is that a lot of the assumption a lot of people will have, and I would say it's cleverly designed that they want you to assume this, is that, oh, the Moon Empress is Manslib and Shenyang is Soul. He's the sun. He's, this purifying bright light. But when you look at the Temple of the Two Moons and read the text there of that it's kept extremely secret. No one's allowed in because there's something in there, and that the myths and legends about what is in there is the true origins of yin and yang.
Yeah.
Like Andy said, that suddenly blows open this whole thing of like, oh, something is weird here. Like something's off. And it leads very heavily into that. One of the things I really enjoyed when Yin Magic was revealed is that Games Workshop and the writing they did with CA and everything and the way it's presented in the game goes really, really heavy to make sure the reader understands that Yin magic is not evil. Even though it's the lore of darkness, it's a very pure form of darkness where it's healy and beneficent, and it's the Moon Empress is very caring, and she shapeshifts and comes down among the people on a very regular basis. The Moon Empress is out doing things in Cathay all the time. But the Emperor isn't.
Just to add on that as well, the Moon Empress is generally seen as the human part of the Empire. If you want to look at the dragon versus human, the balance between the two, she represents the humanity. So the other moon isn't humanity. Just in case you want to go for the obvious one where, well, you could just claim dragons and human. No, she, Manslib, is very much closely tied with humanity as a whole. The Emperor stands as the other part, the thing that stands against it. So if you're looking at the two moons, the other moon is not really humanity at all. It is something potentially quite inhuman.
And the other thing that's really interesting is one of the things we talked about back during the Shadows of Change series of streams is that the other thing that Shenyang can do that is very weird is that he can, quote unquote, purify corruption, where he's able to deal with what we know as the Celestial Lions, and he sucks all of the chaos corruptive energy, supposedly, out of them and makes them into purified personifications of Yang. And they're these great, grandiose, beauteous creatures, which is undeniable. But you sit there and you start looking at this whole thing with the Temple of the Two Moons, and you look over at that and everything that Yang magic represents, where Yang magic is very geological, but it's also very destructive and glorious and grandiose and masculine. And you look at this and you're kind of going,
wait a minute.
Yeah, there's when you look at like that brilliant light, for an analogy, if you pay attention to the shadows, there's something weird going on. There's something off here.
There is definitely something wrong, something rotten in Kislev. I mean, something rotten in Cathay. there has to be, because this is Warhammer, and if there isn't, I am going to bluntly say they've Warhammered wrong. In their desperate desire to try and appeal to a Chinese market, they've made an infallible group. And I find that to be deeply unlikely, because the people involved don't Warhammer wrong. The whole point of Cathay is that it is a Warhammer place, which means
there's tons of crap wrong with it. So this is a nice cherry on that cake. It's
grubby and it's a bit broken. There's something wrong with it. And this would be one way of looking at the overall whole and going, uh-oh, there's something not quite right here. And I do quite like the idea that you have that very clear set of examples where chaos can be removed from certain individuals by this dragon, and the obvious method for doing so would be taking it in.
Yeah, and the other thing is that the Celestial Lions and their get were created a long time ago. A lot of Xin Yang was very, very active in the past. Like, he would fight personally in wars. He would come out and smash aside demon princes and chaos armies. He was a very active individual. But over time, over millennia, with the building of the Great Bastion, with him intensifying his efforts in the Wuxing Compass, and then most importantly, his disappearance, where he and his wife completely vanished inexplicably for somewhere between like 200 to 300 years, and nobody knew where they went. Even Yuan Bo does not know where they went, and it led to chaos and confusion. And then they show up when shit hits the fan, and save the day at the last second. And Xin Yang has not been seen since. Seemingly the only person, as far as we know, which later lore could contradict this and might prove us completely wrong, which is totally fine. We're just theory crafting here.
We are, after all, hammering here.
Yeah. According to what we know, the only two people who are allowed to see Xin Yang are his wife and Yuan Bo, who is the only son trusted to go out and say, this is what father said. Even in the various short stories we've gotten that talk about them and like further little notes, when it comes to like the dragon children talking about like their father, Yuan Bo is bringing what their father said to them. Like Miao Ying, the favored daughter, hasn't seen her dad in a long time.
And I think that there is an obvious open goal here. Now, we've discussed open goals that Warhammer has got laying before it multiple times in other streams, where we see something that clearly patches up lore holes or clearly makes things work, what we feel, a little bit better. And in this case, we have a very open goal. And that open goal is the Emperor is tainted in some fashion or another, corrupted, is in fact perhaps a manifestation of corruption, is perhaps actually held in a state of chains or worse, in a state where they need to try and cleanse him. All of his great cleansing that he has done down through the millennia have built up and turned him into something else. There is a host of different stories you could make, but we have got ourselves potentially something rotten at the very heart of Cathay. And I think that also is a super fascinating tale to potentially tell, and speaks also to what could be done with Cathay as a whole when we move towards the end times, when he could escape, when he could do something. He could be responsible for the Bastion going down. It could be almost anything, because we need a story for that. We can't just simply have Grimgor head-butted his way across Cathay and somehow head-butted his way through a bunch of dragons. As it stands with the lore, the dragons would eat him for breakfast. We're not talking about stat on stat and how it would work in Total War. We're talking about what that dragon can do by its description and what an orc can do by its description. And the dragon can eat an orc. It's as simple as that. If they went on one-on-one, it's going to be a bad time for the orc in almost every situation outside of, let's say, storytelling fiat. Well, how did Grimgor win? Because the author decided that he won. So he's going to write a ridiculous situation to make it come to pass. But there are multiple dragons and the Empress and the Emperor. So we need a way of bringing it all crashing down. And I mean crashing down. And what better way to do that than the very individual who brought it into life in the first place, standing off against chaos in his desperate attempt to hold on to these few humans that he, for one reason or another, thought were important. And even building into the story why those humans were important would be, I think, an important aspect of that. But cut that all down, we have ourselves what is a fascinating temple, a truly fascinating situation, because it hints at solutions to a host of situations that have been created concerning the Emperor. And it hints that he is directly tied to Morrsleep.
Yep. And the last thing I'll note, just for fun, on this particular topic, and then we're going to move on to the other structure that opens up some interesting ideas, is that if you keep in mind what motivated Xinyan at the beginning, where like he found humans kind of genuinely interesting and he saw potential in them and he started protecting them and kind of rose up as this guardian type figure, and that Xinyan, one of the notes about him that I really, really like for the sake of this discussion, and you can start to see the links of uh-ohs, is that there's a note that Xinyan is more attuned with Azir than any other entity in existence. He was born of Azir. And there's literally a quote that says that that by harnessing the magic of Azir, Xinyan can divine all that is to come, and thus he knows the hour of our need. When he tells his faithful the hour has not yet come, they shall believe him. And that Xinyan is, if you're dealing with something like the end times, Xinyan would know before anybody, except for maybe the dark gods planning it themselves, what's going to happen. And the thing is that knowing that can lead to some unfortunate things of like going insane, trying to alter fate, trying to change prophecy and all this stuff. And if you start running with a line of Xinyan reached a point where by developing Yang magic and delving further and further into power, because think about what he's asking Yuan Bo to do. Like, really think about it. Yuan Bo is being sent to Lustria to weaken the geomantic web, which is used for the Great Warding, which keeps the realms of chaos at bay, keeps it from spreading south and north. And he's sucking the magic out, lowering the defenses of Lustria, therefore the world, therefore the vortex, to empower Xinyan's plan, which Games Workshop, and in my chats with Andy Hall, has kept very specifically secret. The only thing I've been told that is really, really fun, I'm glad they kind of keep it secret because it allows us to do this, is that it is extremely important to the narrative of the end times, but they don't want to reveal what it is. But Xinyan has an end times plan, and he is literally risking the safety of the rest of the world to enact whatever it is. But the thing is, it might not be a good plan.
Totally. And I quite like the idea of that being... I quite like the idea of really building the drama there. That would be a better way of putting it than saying that this is the best output. With a little bit of thought, there could be a far better version of how this could be put into place. But we need to undermine Cathay to a degree, because if we don't, as was mentioned earlier, well, it sort of undermines all the other factions in the Warhammer world, doesn't it? Because they are so much smaller, they are so much less capable, they are so much less perfect. And Cathay is presented in such a glimmering dragons rule everything, they are beyond the pale in terms of perfection, that it's almost unreal, especially for the Warhammer world. And looking at how best to undermine that overall feeling and ensure that it can be brought down in a super cool way when we come towards the end times is, I think, a core component of building Cathay, not as a realistic place, because it's Warhammer, for goodness sake. Everything's dialed to 11. And yes, there are all sorts of internal conflicts that exist there. And yes, they have external, let's say, issues that they have to deal with. But all of that aside, it's also, this is Warhammer. It can't be perfect. It has to be a bit broken. There has to be mulch clogging up all the cogs. There's got to be reasons for why things aren't working. And that's not just held at the bottom. Ultimately, Warhammer is all about satire. At its very heart, it's satire. It pricks at power. And at the very heart of the power of Cathay is the dragons. To make them perfect is, I think, a mistake. And this would be one way of ensuring that that mistake didn't really happen. In the same way that making Karl Franz perfect is a mistake.
Yep. All right, we're gonna get caught up on super chat stuff, and then we're gonna jump into the second structure, which opens a lot of really fun ideas and questions. Let's see, we left off.
I wasn't that far up.
No, I'm close. Nope. Okay, then nope. Nope. Here it is. Shen Yang's parents are Krimlo and John Grammaticus. I don't know who the second one is, but if that's the case, then truly Shen Yang is cursed. No wonder he fell to chaos. Misguided Worm 7. Is it possible how the dragon children were born / hatch is by the form the mother was in? Some were hatched from eggs as dragons. Mama's boy Zhao was born human after she taught shapeshifting to dad. So I will say I find the idea that they might have been born differently, which may have resulted in differences. It might explain more of the differences between them, is a fascinating idea. I will note that we know they were all born as dragons. They learned to take human form from their mother after they were already born. So probably not the case. However, I do think that if you want to play around a little bit with like the Shugengan, especially as a concept, there could be an interesting story there of what if some of the Shugengan are born as human babes, but what if some of them aren't?
Yeah, I think the likelihood that some of them are actually dragons is very high. Very, very, very high.
And it's like,
it's
what
just
is
not a part of the game as it currently stands. But for example, Miao Ying potentially being in dragon form, giving birth to a dragon, or popping out a dragon egg seems extremely likely. Equally though, on the other side, any of the other, let's say the male dragon kids having kids with a human woman, it seems extremely likely they'd almost all be human. So I think there's definitely something you could play with there.
Yeah, especially if you could actually tell a really interesting story of there that, you know, Yuan Bo, or like Shen Yang early on in Yuan Bo enforcing it, tells them you may not have any dragon children. They must be humans. And there being a story there. Why can't they have a story
there? And inevitably with the rules being broken, because that's part of
and then who broke the rules and what were the consequences?
Yeah, absolutely.
Should Cathay have all 8 Battlecaster heroes? No, they should not. It's very strictly written to their lore that the Shugengan lords that wield magic wield yin and yang, because those to them are the superior forms of magic. But within Cathay, magic has extreme rules because Shen Yang deeply believed that humans were too flawed to wield more than one wind of magic. He believed they could use Azir, they could be taught to use Azir, and that everything else should be banned. And then in more recent times, out came the alchemists, these who are part of they're part of the secret house. The secret house of alchemists. Zhao Ming is very favorable towards them, and he allows them to work within his realms of these humans that have learned to wield shaman, the lore of metal. But they are deeply outlawed in supposed to be all of Grand Cathay, and this has caused huge issues and conflict between Zhao Ming and Yuan Bo in particular, because Yuan Bo says those are not sanctioned. You are not allowed to have humans learning other winds of magic. They can't be trusted. And Zhao Ming says, he just tells his brother to screw off. And it's noted that they nearly came to blows until the Moon Empress stepped in. And she basically told Yuan Bo to chill out and calm down and let Zhao Ming do what he's doing, because he's using the alchemist to further study the effects of Warpstone and to advance his own technology and to pursue his interests. But this has furthered the divide between Zhao Ming and his other siblings, because they view it as like, oh, that's bad and improper. The only other place we know of that could theoretically be explored as a wind of magic is there is a group of wizards who are called the Jade-Blooded Sorcerers. And they are a group of wizards that hang out somewhere between Zhao Ming and Miao Ying's territory. So between the Great Bastion and Shenyang. And they are kept in like a very particular area, like an enclave, and they study Gairan. And they're said to be incredibly powerful at Gairan. but when you kind of read between the lines, it almost seems like they are Shugengan that specialize in Gairan for some purpose, some grander purpose that they serve within that place. But they're not really meant to go out and use that for battle, so to speak. So I would say you will probably not see the other Winds of Magic show up as heroes unless it's like the Monkey Warriors have a hero type that can wield magic for some reason, or something along those lines. And it's because Shin Yang explicitly outlaws it.
Yeah, I think that the short answer of that is not unless Games Workshop decide to change the state of affairs.
Yeah, which would just kind of make them Empire Battle Wizards, which I think would be boring.
Yeah, it would.
So I'm happy with them having limited magic.
Me too.
Grim Kelto, man, you literally have a different
Grim Kelto.
every single time I see you. Grim
Spider Grim. That doesn't even fit in the menu.
No, this doesn't fit at all. Does whatever indeed. Thank you. Why haven't the Cathayans organized mass production of their weaponry? Is because they have extremely high standards? Is because the thought of their denizens having easy access to weaponry makes the dragons uneasy? So according to the stuff we have, which may not be 100% the full story, it is because the Cathayans have brutally high exacting standards on the quality of their weapons. It talks about in the lore that they are expected, like when it comes to their bows, that your bow is a indicator of your personal pride. You are supposed to have one bow throughout your life that you tend to and you perfect and you care for. And the same thing with their guns, where you are expected to create and maintain your own weaponry, and should it fall below a certain standard, it is deeply shameful. Deeply shameful. Now, this is supposed to make the weaponry of Grand Cathay extremely reliable, and it's like, this is why their weapons are higher quality than what you find in the West. Like their guns are kind of the whole thing of like, Cathayan black powder tends to be higher quality because the Cathayans have more exacting standards than what you'll find in the Empire. Now, whether that's purely because that's just kind of a cultural thing that's cropped up over the years,
bullshit.
Or
that's what it is. It's Orientalist bullshit. It's just a classic example of looking at someone else and going, they're better because of X, Y, and Z. Well, simultaneously, when you go to the other side, you'll find that they're better at various other aspects of creating the same stuff on their side because of reason X, Y, or Z. Yes, they've got a culture that very much supports these things, but does that mean that they are necessarily better? I think the answer is almost certainly no. No, they're just humans humaning. And whilst they are strongly influenced, but
yeah, I will say what is cool about that aspect of the lore is that there is a note that it is why when you go to Cathay, all the weapons tend to be personalized. There are various aspects about your family and your history and your past that are engraved upon the weapons.
That's much better.
Yeah, and that's very standard because you're supposed to have those weapons with you. Like it is a part of you. You're meant to keep them with you, and really learn how to use them. But it's also the whole thing of like every single child in Grand Cathay is expected to know how to use a bow because that honors the Moon Empress. Even if it's not practical to what you do for your living, you're supposed to understand properly how to use one, because the Moon Empress favors that, and that's how you honor her. But that being said, the idea that the Cathayans have not delved into mass producing weaponry as an attempt to keep certain folks from having easy access to weapons that could potentially threaten uprisings or rebellions, especially when it comes to black powder, I do think there's a story you could explore there of that. Black powder weapons especially are not wielded by the peasantry. The peasantry use like bows and their spears and the weapons they maintain personally, but like, you get your actual gunpowder weapons from like the forges of Nangao or from the major cities, and those are once again individually produced for those and not like mass produced and spread out like you might find in the Empire per se, which if you want to go with the story of this is meant to make rebellions more difficult, that is a story you could explore.
Yep.
And like, especially I would say not necessarily that it makes the dragons uneasy, but it makes like the magistrates uneasy is a very interesting thing you could look into, because they're like, Cathay has bandits. They're all over the place. Humans being humans happens all over the time. But oh boy, you better hope that like Yuan Bo in particular doesn't have to come down to deal with your province because you're having problems controlling your people, because you're not going to like what he does. He's called the Emperor's Executioner for a reason, and it's noted he does not like, if you are failing to maintain harmony, there's literally a tech that talks about this in the Cathay tree, that you can be effortlessly replaced by a Shugengan if you're failing your duties.
Yep, quite right too.
Which is, spooky to think about. Is that why the Emperor can dechaosify? Yeah, we were talking about that. Yeah.
We were talking about that earlier, and the answer is almost certainly Hammond. Very possibly, yes, if you go with that storyline.
Yeah, Fireside, personal headcanon that the Monkey King was a creation of the Dragon Emperor. It's possible. I personally doubt it. I think the Monkey King actually more likely came from the other side of the mountains. But we'll have to see when he eventually arrives. One argument that could be that while he's able to stay awake, it takes most of his energy, and he has to do so after pouring so much of himself into things. There is an interesting note that Shen Yang does not go into battle anymore after the creation of the Great Bastion, because he pours literally so much of himself into the Great Bastion, to the point that it's noted that should the Bastion ever fall, it's highly believed that Shen Yang would die if the wall was destroyed.
Yeah. So ultimately, you want to build a cool story, and this could be one story, but is it cool? Does this really speak to the heart of Cathay? He likes to have long naps. My personal preference would be no, because it doesn't speak to the character of Cathay as a whole.
Yeah, but the
character of Cathay as a whole is all about trying to hold off chaos, trying to hold off the horrors of chaos. And the Emperor, as a personification of that, should be trying to do the same thing. And if he's a personification of his entire nation, and his nation is riddled through with chaos, and they're constantly having to stamp it out, you could very quickly turn him into a walking metaphor for that, where he is also riddled through with chaos, and they're trying to stamp it out of him. And the weaknesses that he has incurred upon himself are because he has tried to hold off chaos. The Bastion, giving him so much of himself to that, has weakened his actual corpus, his mortal form, meaning that there are other, let's say, infiltrations that have been able to be made. There's a host of fun versions you could create from this, but I wouldn't go for, personally, Mr. Pig, he likes to have a nap, purely because it doesn't really tell a story.
Yeah, I would agree. But yeah, it's also worth noting that it would be less likely to be like, oh, he has to sleep every once in a while, because once the Bastion was created, he no longer needs to put himself into things. He just directs the compass, because it's noted about the compass isn't always pointed at the Great Bastion or the River of Souls. Shen Yang or Yuan Bo at times, when his father is absent, can actually point the compass at other things. Even within the lore, it's not just a game mechanic. Like, there are times where it talks about that they will send Yang magic, which once again is infused with life, into like the Nongsheng Basin in order to proliferate the crops and to make the rivers bounteous with life and to solve various issues. They're quite literally throwing magic at problems. Now, granted, it's considered kind of nerve-wracking to do this, because that means you're not putting magic into defenses. So you have to use this power wisely, but there are a lot of different places where the magic can be directed that has really fascinating effects, which for the people of Grand Cathay could lead to some probably very unique scenarios where you have constant people being sent to Wei-Jin to beg in front of Yuan Bo to, hey, could you direct the magic at our lands because we're suffering, or there's a famine, or there's other things going on, and you have this cold dragon looking down on you who doesn't even have pupils because his eyes are pure white like the dragon children, deciding whether he can direct the compass to aid your people so you don't starve and suffer horribly. And he might go no, and of course he's not going to explain himself, but in his head he's doing these calculations of, can I afford to redirect the compass for whatever this needs to do, or do I know there's a chaos invasion coming, or do I know someone's trying to cross the river and it needs to be reinforced, or like there's this other great threat, which once again leads into some really fun storytelling. Tyrant, Grimgor was the incarnate wind of beast at the time, was he not? Yes, but we already don't like that for other reasons. Go check out our End Times Part 1 stream. I'm not going to wax lyrical on it because I'm keeping an eye on the time. But yeah, go watch that stream about why we think that that's stupid. He should have been just simply the avatar of like Gork. But that being said, even then, fighting like the 9 dragon kids and the Moon Empress and the Celestial Emperor by himself is stupid.
Yeah, it is a lot.
Summer Hawkins, it's good to see you guys with another lore beer stream, and even better to see Andy. Thank you so much for the lore conversation. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Silver. Appreciate it.
Shin Yang sounds like the god of war Odin. There are aspects of similarities you can pull there. Obviously, like God of War Odin is far more obsessed with like knowledge and wanting to know everything, so he has control over various aspects. But there are some similarities there. I fucking love God of War Odin. That's a great villain. Phil, we know Cathay has an anti-theistic civilization, but how would they treat entities like spirits of nature, such as treemen and dryads, which are present in Cathay and Total War? That's a great question.
Yeah, I think that's I think, loosely speaking, that it hasn't been covered with a proper amount of depth, because spirits are a core component of the Warhammer world, etheric entities that move into the life of the Warhammer world and sink in through one fashion or another. It's particularly Eastern as well, in terms of how they, particularly when you move over to Nippon and their kami and how they represent as well. So you would almost certainly need to address this, but it's not been properly addressed. And I do feel, for example, there is one way that we could reinterpret our emperor. One of the reasons that he's becoming something different is because of the belief of his people, who are effectively deifying him. What if he is, beyond his own preference and control, becoming something different because of the very people that he tries to protect? What if the ultimate downfall of Cathay is the fact that he tries so hard to protect the Cathayans? There's lots of alternative ways that we can spin our dragon at the top. One is chaos. Another one is to take a more route like this, where he is becoming effectively an etheric entity, a spirit, like a god, the opposite of what it wants to become. So all of this needs examination and hasn't had it. And I'm not sure we'll ever really get it, because in this depth of understanding of how the Warhammer world is composed is rarely all that important for the war game or for the computer game, where all they're really concentrating on is the next thing you're going to hit, with perhaps a little quotation or two that provides some extra context for why you're hitting them, with maybe another quotation giving you a hint for something that could be. The only thing that's going to answer questions like this with any real depth is probably going to be a role-playing game, and that's going to require a writer who actually understands the broader Warhammer world as well as the Cathayan world that they're attempting to represent.
Yeah, I will say the interesting thing that Total War did, and granted, this could absolutely have nothing to do with the lore. It could just be that they just stuck it there and they didn't think about it beyond that, which is totally fine. But if you want to work with it, the spirits, I think it's Shenling, something like that. I forget what that forest spirit faction their name is, but there is a forest spirit faction in the south, but they're not normal. They are what are called a malevolent forest spirit faction, which are akin to Drycha, and that they hate anything that is not them. And they are cruel, malevolent, nasty creatures, which you could run with the idea that the dragons deeply dislike and distrust all etheric entities and are trying to oppress or suppress the spirits of the land, the spirits of the river, the spirits of the forest, which would cause those spirits to become hostile, and would lead to some interesting stories of, like, there are places where the spirits are so powerful that the Cathayans just don't go there. But it especially if you end up running with the idea that Nippon is a land that tries very hard to be harmonious with their spirits and acknowledge their spirits as like entities that need to be courted to, and all this other stuff. And End is very similar, where it's like the land of 1,000 gods, and there's like a whole thing about how the people there are very keenly aware of the fact that many of the forests and spirits and rivers have spirits that are worshipped as gods or acknowledged and given tributes and offerings, so that the spirits aren't assholes to them. The idea that Cathay is unique in that it's so anti-etheric entities that the dragons are actively trying to crush all of these creatures would make for a very unique place, that there could be a lot of stories there of hardship and tragedy caused by the dragons being too oppressive. Maybe that's why they have to use the Wuxing compass to deal with various things like famines and droughts and all of these other horrible things that could be avoided if they just worked in harmony with the spirits. But the dragons look at them and go, no, we're not going to deal with these gods, these entities.
I think it's in a core component of what Cathay is, and that's their anti, let's say, spirit or theistic, if you wish, doctrine. And it has to have consequences. If it doesn't, then why isn't everyone like this? Clearly it should have consequences, and that'd be one way of resolving it.
Corn G-Man, why Azir didn't go to
Dragon Emperor?
Oh, Dragon Emperor in the End Times. Doesn't mean he already left the planet / disappear. If you want the actual answer, it's because as far as Games Workshop is concerned, nothing outside of the Empire existed, pretty much.
Harsh, but almost not unfair.
Yeah. If you're looking for an in-lore reason, you could argue because he had already died or he had already left. He had enacted whatever his plan was. I would say that I would love to one day sit down and do like a potential what if rewrite of the End Times with all the new lore we have, because you could tell some really wild stories.
I definitely think that there is a massive gaping hole here in the rest of the world where clearly the End Times writers forgot that the rest of the world existed, or just simply didn't want to acknowledge it because it was too much fuss. Both of which is an unacceptable position. They could have created some cool, fun lore for their End Time books that didn't necessarily mean creating entirely new armies. They could have just simply said, this thing went over there, did a particular thing. We have a single example that comes back. Oh, look, the such and such from X has now become manifest with this wind. Yay. But they didn't do that. They just stuck with what they knew with the very small number of armies that they thought were important. And it was rubbish.
Yeah. I mean, to put it bluntly, like the Ogre Kingdoms, which were a playable faction in the main core 5 books, do not get any mentions at all. It's only, and neither does Cathay or End or any of those other places. The only reason we know what happened is because one of the Black Library side novels had an author who, while he was writing it, must have gone, oh yeah, there's like a whole bunch of stuff in the world. I guess I should do something with that. And in a single sentence, literally a single sentence, wiped out like half the planet via Grimgore.
Yeah. Just amazing.
Yeah. Adam Russo, Monkey King is one of the few that knows there's something wrong with the Dragon Emperor, and that's why they put out propaganda disparaging the Monkey King.
I like that. I like that because
that could work really well.
Yeah, we need conflict in this setting.
Yeah, that is something we've talked a lot about. Well, actually, not on this Lord Beers, but like in a prior time when Andy Hall showed up on the show, is that the Dragon Emperor literally puts out tons of propaganda about the Monkey King, where like each different cardinal direction of Grand Cathay has different myths about what the Monkey King is. Where like and each of them associates him with a different dark god. So like in the north, they're like, oh, he's a great gorilla that's red and he rips people apart. He's all blood for the blood god. And in the east, they're like, oh no, he's actually like he's like this big gross orangutan that's covered in boils and dripping in pus and putrescence and yada yada Nurgle. And then in one of the other directions, they're like, no, he's a spider monkey that whispers in people's ears and gets people to fight amongst themselves. And he's a conniving trickster, little bastard. And then the last one, they're like, no, he's a great baboon with a giant ass that fucks everything that he sees. And he's gluttonous and he's very Slaneshi. But none of that is true. Literally none of that is true. It's just propaganda. Which
bluntly, yeah, sure.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Tyrant, if factions aren't supposed to be perfect, then why don't the Ogre Kingdoms have any flaws?
That is a very good question that Games Workshop have yet to answer, Tyrant.
Yeah, they're just perfect. Absolutely perfect. If only we could all devour our own fathers. Truly, the world would be a better place. The Singemeister, Xin Yang did set up the Thieves Guild for balance.
I don't know. Is that the case?
That is not something that I'm aware of, though it might be hidden in the tech tree. Has
as a writer for more than once, just the idea of calling something a thieves guild just makes me sad. They didn't exist.
I have no recollection of that, so I don't know if that's an actual like this is something I saw written, or if that's just that could be a joke. I'm not sure, or a reference to something. It is in one of the texts. Well, then yeah. I mean, though, Thieves Guild, they should definitely change the name on that. That's a boring name, considering that the Alchemists are literally called the House of Secrets, which is a great name. Which tech is that? Someone let me know. Because I've got the list.
I want to know that one too.
I would just have to find it. Mornington Crescent. Is Azir being sanctioned in Cathay related to Miao Ying being her father's favorite, linking this to Zhao Ming being allowed authority over the wizards of Shaman? No, because Miao Ying has nothing to do with Azir. Miao Ying is the dragon of water, which is the Cathayan way of saying the dragon of life. She's associated with life magic. I'm aware she's called the Storm Dragon. I'm aware she has a lot of like lightning and stuff around her, but it's a thing about like it's in the sense of storms bringing life, storms bringing rain, having all this other stuff.
Sure.
Morning Crescent says, oh no, okay, y'all are still, chat's debating itself. Okay, if someone finds what specific tech that is real quick, let me know, because I never seen that, to my knowledge, but I could have easily missed it. Patrick Mulligan, the knowledge is strong with you, Sotek. A powerful lore master you shall become. Henceforth, you shall be known as Get Out. Thank you for the support. Get out. I'm not even going to finish that. I refuse. Hammond, Q, Cathayan Peasant, Spy Kids quote. Do you think Dragon God lives in the Celestial City because he, too, lives in fear of what he's created?
And I don't think that there's necessarily anything wrong with that. We need to build a really good story. It doesn't actually matter about the details specifically. We've thrown out already 2 examples of things that they could be, and you could reinterpret those in entirely original, fun ways. But on top of that, we could very easily go with a very different direction too.
Oh, okay. The way you worded, I say this with love, the way you worded this was very different than what this is saying. So there is a tech called Thieves Guild, which is not the Thieves Guild, it's just kind of a reference. But it says that retired gate masters with the Dragon Emperor's tacit approval often train underworld denizens in the ways of the Jade Warriors. In this way, even criminals are taught balance. That's a Reformation program.
Yeah, Reformation.
That is people being reformed to fit within harmony, that is not the Dragon Emperor saying, let's teach people how to be thieves, or I'm going to make a Thieves Guild. It's saying the exact opposite.
Yep, agreed.
Mr. Pig, so could the compass pointing at the bastion help keep his corruption at bay? So when they have to divert it, it starts to spread.
I mean, assuming there's even corruption there. I mean, it's a leap that we theory hammered into place purely because we need to have some fun answers to some unanswered questions. But I mean, could it? Sure, it could.
Yeah, I would argue,
you could also argue that it could corrupt him more. The more that you are throwing magic into it, the more you're throwing magic directly into a part of him, and that magic could, by its very nature, slightly corrupt him further. So the very process of supporting the bastion that keeps them out also makes him a touch more corrupt, which is a problem that they need to fix, which is why perhaps the Emperor and the Empress pissed off for a while, trying to figure out how to ensure that because he poured himself into this bastion, he himself doesn't corrupt in turn, which would, I imagine, for them be somewhat of a headache. So there's lots of answers we could have, and we could literally go in either direction on that particular problem and come up with 2 great stories.
Yep. Tiblam, one child has been corrupted. All those purified Chaos Lions are just test subjects for trying to purify a fallen son or daughter, and it goes wrong and the father gets contaminated instead. I will say there is a potentially interesting tale there. I personally believe extremely strongly that one of the dragon children has fallen to chaos, fell to Zinch, and became the dragon that we know as Flamefang, who has another Cathayan name, because it's like, oh, there's a great Zinchian Cathayan dragon that Archaon fights and kills in order to get the Ishirian. I think that story writes itself and is really, really kick-ass. The idea that the Celestial Dragon Emperor may have tried to like forcefully extract corruption from one of his children and it hurt him, and he failed. There's a really fun story there that you could run with. I think that's a good way of also tipping him over the edge of being the perfect example of everything that could be into something that's broken and ultimately leads to the end times, and his own blood being responsible for bringing about the end times because Archaon kicks living crap out of one of his kids, providing him with extraordinary power. Yeah, there's lots of cool stories that could be dropped in there, and importantly, that ties Cathay and all of the rest of those stories into the core components of the end times. Yep. The Dragon Emperor is a Sheogorath Jigleg type entity, torn between 2 very different personas. Could be.
Yeah, very well could be.
Yeah. Would not say there's much evidence there, but could be.
Yeah, I mean, you're trying to support the key aspect of the yin and the yang there, and him being perhaps a representation of the yin and the yang, pushing in two different directions, could be done. But you have the Empress standing as the other face of that, so you really wouldn't want to provide effectively three faces to a two-faced problem. So that wouldn't be my preference, although I'm sure it could be written well with a bit of thought.
Yep. And then Phil. So we've got an ancient, extremely powerful autocrat who, by trying to save the world, has crafted an oppressive, dogmatic society led by his immortal children and their superhuman descendants, creating as many problems as it solves in the process, and who might have gotten crippled in the process. Nope, doesn't ring a bell. There are some. I'm going to say this. I'm going to resist the temptation to say something snarky and say something honest instead. There are undeniably some similarities between the stories of like the Emperor and the Primarchs and the Dragon Children and the Celestial Dragon Emperor. I've seen them all over the place. A lot of people. I will say I find they are very, very forced. There are some similarities between them, but only in the sense of tropes as opposed to actual inspiration. And that I find they are wildly, wildly different. Where the Emperor is this kind of like unknowable, bizarre entity that had 18 clones. They're not his kids because he doesn't like make them the normal way. He creates them in a lab. Whereas the Celestial Dragon Emperor has a wife. He has a family. He like represents these different values, and he's a dragon. He is much more grounded, which is weird to say considering what the Emperor is like. Oh, he's the god of humanity. But there's a lot of very extreme differences between the two sides.
So I'll take a slightly different angle and actually completely agree. And that is, as humans, we are naturally predisposed towards looking for patterns. We look for things of similarity or shapes that are similar and going, hey, that matches that. And we tend to forget all the things that don't. All the massive number of things that are so contradictory to the other part because it ruins the pattern that we're building. So yeah, sure, you can pick and choose. I could pick and choose something similar from most of the various factions in the Warhammer world and find something that would bridge over and build. And I could do this for almost any theory. One of the great joys of world building and theory crafting is that you can very easily go, oh, it's a bit like that, isn't it? It's a bit like that. But in this case, I think that whilst, yes, you could build this and you could even write to it if you desperately wish to do so would be to both diminish the 40k setting and also the unique nature of Cathay and how it's been built. And regardless of how various theories could be read to be similar as something else, the actual execution and the process of it would, unless you were literally trying to duplicate it, be so very different, with not just a few contradictory points, it would just be different, that I think drawing those analogies is, I mean, it's not weak sauce. Finding patterns is fun, but I don't think it is to the benefit of the setting there.
Yeah, that all to say, I like, don't get me wrong, I've seen like literal fan fictions and fan art of like Dragon Kids and what Primarch they're the most like, or like what are the similarities, and like, yeah, keep it up. Those are super fun. Have fun with it. Have a good time. But I would say don't fall into the trap of thinking that, oh, this is clearly inspired and directly taken from the 40k Emperor and the Primarchs. I would say that's probably not true. It's probably from more standard tropes. Justin Keeley, Yang dying if the Bastion is destroyed haven't been seen since it was built. We think there's no hard evidence of that. That is something we're messing around with. Yeah. Needs constant Yang magic directed to it. The Emperor is the Bastion. Most information we have suggests that Shen Yang has been around. He's doing stuff.
And it's still around. Yeah. I mean, you could build stories where that's the case, but I probably wouldn't, just because it's ultimately at its heart a bit ridiculous. And Warhammer works at its best when it skirts that line on the other side, where it's, yes, of course it's ridiculous and dialed up to 11 and crazy, but it's still grounded in some form of reality, and turning the Emperor into a giant wall is a bit rubbish.
Yeah, I agree. I think just having it where it's directly tied into his life force is an interesting enough point. And you could also argue that it's just propaganda, that like the dragons tell the people of Cathay to make them fight even harder for the wall. But you could also say, oh no, it's totally true. And, you know, you can do whatever you want with it. So that to say, let's get on to the last landmark thing, because we're running a little low on time. I suspect the thing I'm about to read is going to make Andy laugh. And the reason, I don't know if he knows what I'm about to read, but
let's find out. I'm looking forward to being lectured at. Go for it.
So the reason I think it's going to make him laugh is because this falls so heavily into the goofy ass trope where the second you give a Warhammer writer a new toy, what he's going to do is he's going to immediately turn at something else that exists in Warhammer and go, well, this is better than that, when that was established as the best version of this thing. Because they love that shit and it's goofy. So this is the Paradise Gardens.
The gardens.
Once again, we do not know for sure if the Paradise Gardens are in the Celestial City or if they're in the city of Wei-Jin. I suspect they're in the Celestial City based on its descriptions. But it says the following note, and then we'll kind of talk about it a bit, which is the gardens of the Moon Empress are of an outstanding natural beauty, said to be more magnificent than even the heart of Avalorn. Because, fuck elves.
Yep, fuck elves.
Stupid pointy-eared bastards. Our garden is better. Now, the Paradise Gardens, you may hear that and go, okay, well, that's not that interesting. But it actually does have some interesting aspects to it, which is that the Moon Empress, once again, is incredibly active. She's out doing things. She tends a garden. She puts on disguises and goes down and heals the people of Cathay. She brings them gifts. And she is obsessed with creating life, whether it be in a sentient form or whether it be in a plant form. She is a grower, a creator to an almost obsessive degree, which is really fascinating. Where, like, we kind of talked about how the Temple of Two Moons explores a lot about Xin Yang. This explores a lot about Mom.
Yeah.
Where you have this entity from another world, almost quite literally, being from the moon itself, being from Manslib, who comes down to this world and she literally is obsessed and cannot stop herself with being so empathetic towards every form of life that it's almost ridiculous.
Yeah, I think it really strongly speaks to her character and also strongly speaks to the Dragon Emperor's character, because ultimately it's all about balance. If she is this great nurturer, then he is that which cuts things off and brings them to an end. And in many respects, you can see him being the primary instigator behind the wars, the the ending of things which need to be ended regardless of what
the
Mom
sword
thinks. Yeah, he's the sword and she's on the other side. He's the scythe of death in many respects, where she is the giver of life. And if we are looking at this as a balance, then it would suggest that the entire concept of Cathay is hers. That she was the one that said we must protect, when he was the one that said we must stop chaos. And they came to the agreement of the best way to do so is through nurturing that which chaos will use against us. There's lots of theories you can go down with, but what we know for certain is that Grand Cathay is bound together because the good old honorable dragon, the emperor, decided that was the right thing to do, where the empress is often sidelined in terms of the actual story that's built up for this. I think it far more likely that our great nurturing character is the one who was responsible for this. It had nothing to do with honor per se. It had literally to do with her inability to see life come to an end in such a horrific fashion as chaos was going to offer, and her being the balancing point to him saying, I don't freaking care, and her saying, well, I do, because that's who she is. She nurtures life. He does not. He cuts off life and brings it to an end. He squirrels away while the old ones destroy the world, and he does nothing. Fuck all. He lets the world burn while he hides away elsewhere, where she goes, no, we can't do this anymore. She is the opposite of what he seems to represent, which is the darker aspects of the character. He is a winnower, not a nurturer. He is an ender, not a beginner. So the very concept of Cathay seems to be hers, I would argue, at least from the very nature of their characters. And this location, which is a representation, consider it the opposite of personification. It's a geographical location of a character. It pretty much is a location to say who she is. Who is she? She is the nurturer. And what do we have for him beyond seeing what his kids are like? And the influence he's had upon them, where half of them are monsters. Autocratic monsters. And that's what appears to come largely from him.
Yeah, I will say, though, there is a fun, sinister aspect that I think the gardens work as a perfect analogy for, and that a garden isn't just simply letting everything grow and just being fine with that, but it's also pruning. It's also getting rid of problems and disease and making sure things grow beautifully. And the thing is that the Moon Empress created the Crowmen. Like, the creatures that spy on the people of Cathay every day and watch out for problematic elements and brutally murder them. And like many people, there's a whole thing about how the Shugengans that are aware of the Crowmen, or those that are aware of them, say, I don't understand why the Moon Empress trusts them. They're terrifying. They're monsters. And yet they're her agents. Like, these creatures are horrifying. Yeah. Like, there's that kind of sinister edge of like, she is loving and nurturing and caring, and she is said to weep tears for every fallen child of Cathay.
You actually hit it right there. Nurturing.
Yeah.
Nurturing requires care. It requires doing something. It doesn't require life going out.
The Nurgle method.
Facing everything without protection. No, it's nurture. She is a mother. She nurtures and protects. And to protect and nurture requires constant vigilance. You don't let your toddler just wander around the house full of sharp knives without being watched. You're constantly looking after your kids. And to her, she's constantly looking after her kids. The Onyx Crowmen are nothing more than another representation of that. Then, for all they may appear monstrous to others, a parent telling off a child can seem monstrous to someone who doesn't understand how children need to be told off when they do things wrong, so that they can become hopefully better people and hopefully won't endanger themselves again by straying too close to an outlet or a power outlet or something similar. Okay, you tell the child off, don't go there. That can look, if you just see it in exclusion, terrifying, because they're getting shouted at or something. It's emotional abuse. It's terrifying. No, it's all part of the nurturing character represented in a slightly different way. The Onyx Crowmen are nurturers of society. And indeed, I think that she is a perfect representation of all of those aspects. She is cultivating it. She's nurturing it. She's caring for it. Cathay is, in much of its character, a representation of her looking after everything, where things like, let's say, the things that hit stuff appear to be far more dad's side rather than mum's side, where dad's like, if anyone comes after my kids, I'll fucking punch them in the face. That's what I'll do. Where she's like, no, I'll make sure my kids can look after themselves because I'll care for them. Where he's like, no, I'm ready. I'm going to go right to their house. Bosh! So a very different nature, a very classical masculine and classical feminine way of dealing with these things without necessarily lapsing too much into stereotype.
Yeah, which ties well into the aspect that even the Cathayans understand Yang is a masculine element, whereas Yin is the feminine element. And the other thing that I find actually really, really fun about Yin and Yang when comparing them against their creators is that how, and I actually think I can see in here how in particular they kind of fell in love with one another, is that like you have Yin being this element of darkness that has kind of many sinister aspects.
Where's the Azir in there? God damn it.
Yeah, but it's like, but there's also the lack of life, that without Yang, Yin is oppressive. It's dark and foreboding and sinister in a lot of ways. It's not evil. It's not, but it's spooky, so to speak. But in Xin Yang, there's light and life and fire and warmth. Everything that Kuei Yin seems to deeply love and cherish. Where in a similar light, though kind of a little more terrifying, I think Xin Yang truly loves the dark elements of what Xin Yang represents and loves many aspects about her. But it's interesting how their personalities almost seem to draw more from what the opposite represents as opposed to what they individually represent. Compared to, like, obviously they represent well their masculine and feminine elements, and like Xin Yang is very explosive and the things he creates are very flashy and over the top, whereas Xin Yang is far more subtle and in the shadows. But when it comes to like the true cores of their personality, you can see how it almost seems like they brought out, I think in the grand scheme, better parts of one another, which tells like a really fun love story that I think is really, really good. And could, if like someone were to tackle it as a short story, it could be really beautiful, but also kind of tragic at the same time. But that is to say that the Paradise Gardens, which fun name, I like that a lot, is Paradise Gardens, also ties very much into that. Wei-Jin has such a unique obsession with plant life, where her favored location in Grand Cathay, like you might think, oh, it's like the top of a mountain peak because it's close to the moon, or like blah, 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 blah. No, it's a forest. The forest of Kunlan is her favored desired location. It's far from the city, and it's a great forest that's along a set of central mountains in Cathay, but she goes to great pains to visit the forest when she can, and has the lumber brought from the forest of Kunlan, or the forest of the moon as it's sometimes known, to Wei-Jin, where she does things with it. And it's not exactly explained.
That was a way of phrasing.
You could have let it slid. Oh man, I need to stop. You could have let it go. There we go.
Oh,
but there is something fascinating there of like the idea that thinking about what she left behind on Manslib, what happened to the race of shapeshifters on Manslib, what happened, like how advanced was their culture? Did they have their own gardens? What kind of things did they get up to? What kind of forms of life did they cherish before they, without a doubt, got wiped off the face of the moon by the coming of chaos?
Does make you wonder. And just as a nice summation point in all of this, because it's very easy to well, at least the bits I was discussing, it's very easy to think of the feminine aspect of care and nurturing and all of that as being the wussy aspect, as I've heard various folks try to present it with one word or another. They're a bit rubbish, aren't they? Yeah. I think if you went to the bottom of any standard gardener's garden and took a look in their shed, you would be not inaccurate to say that it is a horror show of implements, a terrifying selection of truly terrible tools. And if you were to judge the gardener by the horror show of sharp implements in there, you would say, well, the gardener's potentially a bad figure. And I think that is a good way to also view her. The horrifying weapons that she uses to cultivate her culture will be seen exactly as that tool shed. And a certain light, it is terrifying. It is awful. And how could that possibly go hand in hand with this seemingly serene figure who is making her way through her gardens and her forests, looking purity and light? And the answer is because cultivating things, nurturing things is a tough job, a really hard one. And to care for something is to also realize that you have to put yourself in a position where you have to sometimes be mean, or at least appear to be mean, to better ensure that you can get the best outcomes. Whether that means pruning, which is not killing the tree, that is merely cutting off the bits that are unwanted, or whether that means something else, that is pretty much down to the individual circumstances. But do not think of our Empress here as a figure of, let's say, goodness, because goodness is a very moralistic place to go, and it is very much determined by your own sense of morals. Her morals are quite literally otherworldly. She doesn't come from the Warhammer world. She comes from beyond, and she has suffered almost certainly absolutely horrific loss. And she quite clearly has chosen not for that loss to occur again. And she has done that through Cathay. And the pruning that she has done to Cathay to ensure it won't fall, one presumes in the same way, has been extensive, which means that come the end times, she is going to be an absolutely horrific individual to either A, confront, or watch Cathay go down, and her anger will be, her rage will be almost unparalleled. There's all sorts of cool stories that could be built for the end times with a character like that who watches the dissolution occurring again. Oh, it would be horrific. Rather nasty.
Yep, and also
that's-
a guardian
that's
angel.
nice.
I love this.
Yeah.
I love this comment. The moon empress is the gardener. The crowmen are the shears. Yeah, exactly. Which, yeah, and if you're a plant, you know, a person, but if you're a plant out in the garden, yeah, those shears are going to look kind of fucking terrifying.
Absolutely. I mean, if I was a plant, I would not like the shears.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Get off my fingers. Yeah, dick gardener.
Charles CK, as we're kind of coming up on time here. Charles CK, given a lot of the later end times-ish Warhammer stuff is being built into AOS and altered through AOS, could the Emperor's connection to Azir connect him to the AOS Star Dragons? I would not be shocked if there is a Games Workshop writer somewhere lurking within GW headquarters who is kicking themselves that they didn't they didn't create Grand Cathay before, so they could have made Dracothian, who's the big bad Star Dragon of AOS, just Xinyang. Having survived into AOS, but taken on a new form as a living constellation. That being said, I would not be shocked if they ended up playing with that in the future. Right now, the answer would probably be no, but that could easily change.
Yeah, I mean, this is just going to get rewritten into the lore at some point. It seems almost inevitable. Regardless of us purely focusing on the Warhammer side of things, where we just look at Warhammer and what makes sense there, and the Emperor and the great question marks that sit over the Emperor, and how exactly that Dragon Emperor could manifest. It literally doesn't matter if Age of Sigmar goes, actually, he's this. The second you do that, he is now that all the way back into Warhammer, and they will rewrite Warhammer to match. So as much as we can sit here and theorize without worrying about what will happen in Age of Sigmar, the reality of what occurs means that I would not be surprised if in this version of Age of Sigmar or the next edition, they go, right, we've got all this Cathay material, it's now time to incorporate it. And characters that were one thing in the previous edition suddenly become something different in the new edition. Do not think that Games Workshop is above rewriting what appear to be solid lore purely to match their intentions, because they will again and again. The idea that the good old Emperor Dragon is not going to appear inside Age of Sigmar is, I think, a foolish idea. It's going to happen, and almost certainly they won't care about what makes the best story for Warhammer or Cathay. They will only care about one thing: how can we use a big fuck off Emperor Dragon thing in the best possible way, and how can we make it super, super awesome? And then the Warhammer writers will have to look at it and go, right, so how am I going to justify the Emperor Dragon that we've been building here and also allow it to become that which comes later? And it'll be left to those writers at a later date to pick up the pieces.
Yeah. And with that, we kind of come to the end of what information we have on the Celestial City in Wei-Jin, of this incredible floating palace district city fortress up in the sky that few get to go to, though there are some indications that that there is that kind of that system that allows people to get from that mountaintop to there. So people will go up there, whether they're servants, though it is implied that sometimes there's rare instances where people from foreign lands will be invited. Oh, actually, no, I lied. There's one more really important thing to talk about. We have enough time to talk about it. The Monkey King. So there was an incident where there about 200 years ago, while the Great War Against Chaos was raging in the old world, Cathay had their own problem, but it didn't come from the north. It came from the south, which is that the Monkey King, whose name we do not know at this point, who lives down in the mountains of heaven, which are to the southwest of Cathay. They're the mountain. It's like the biggest fucking mountain range there is. It's horrifyingly huge, even compared to the ancient giant lands. And it separates the kingdoms of End from Grand Cathay. And the Monkey King resides there, and he's been there for a long time. He's got his own whole race of what are simply known as the Monkey Warriors right now, though we will probably learn more about them in the near future. There are a lot of rumors coming around that the Monkey King is actually coming to Total War quite soon. But while most of the time he's treated as a on and off ally of Cathay, to the point where the court of the Monkey Court is an established governmental body within Grand Cathay that has a bunch of the Monkey Warriors and the Monkey King himself sitting as the big boss, and they're supposed to oversee affairs of their kind in Grand Cathay. However, it's noted that the court is so chaotic and absurd that it drives most Cathayans to horror upon witnessing it. But there's also like the Tigerman Court, which the Tiger Court is deals with the tiger men that live on the Cathayan side of the mountains, because there's a location literally called the Village of the Tiger Men, which has actually been notated in Cathay for like a really fucking long time. It shows up on one of the really old maps. But the Monkey King normally is an on and off ally. His relationship with Li Dao the Fire Dragon, who's the Dragon of the South, is not the best. They have sometimes they unify against a common foe, like the Naga of Koresh or the Kingdoms of In trying to invade across the mountains. Other times they're trying to murder each other. And there was one particularly really bad incident, and it of course involved the Skaven, where somehow, some way, the Skaven of Clan Eshin managed to get into a conversation with the Monkey King and flatter him to such an extent. They fanned his ego so much that they convinced the Monkey King he should be emperor. Or actually, if you want to build on what we've been building in this lore, maybe they revealed some truths about the Dragon Emperor to the Monkey King that made him realize he needs to take over, because the Celestial Dragon Emperor can't be trusted. But either way, it should be noted that at this point, Cathay is already in chaos. The Dragon Emperor and the Moon Empress have been gone for over a century. And the Dragon Kids are infighting. There's actual wars being waged between the Dragon Children and their various forces, where the north, south, east, west, and central Cathay are all infighting. There's banditry everywhere. It's a mess. And into this, the Skaven convinced the Monkey King he should be the savior. He should save the day. And he goes, "You're right."
Sure.
Whether he did it because he's arrogant, whether he did it because they convinced him it was a noble cause, we don't know yet. We don't really know a lot about him personality-wise just yet. But regardless, he leads a huge invasion of Cathay with the help of Clan Eshin, and works his way all the way north and fights his way past the mountains in central Cathay all the way up to Wei-Jin and lays siege. And he wins. Mm-hmm. He fights each of the Dragon Children. Well, not each of them, but he fights some of them. But individually, they cannot beat him because he's that fucking scary, which means that he must be something crazy. And he forces his way into Wei-Jin, and he captures the Celestial City. And the Monkey King takes the throne. He sits on Xinyang's throne and is like, "Great, I'm emperor now. I'm the Monkey Emperor." And then he proceeds to make a Skaven warlord of Clan Eshin basically his right-hand man, and in charge of a significant amount of Cathay, which this, hilariously, the Monkey King taking the throne doesn't seem to be the point that is too much for the Dragon Children. It's the Skaven getting a political position over Grand Cathay that pushes it too far. And the Dragon Children unify, and a great big battle breaks out, where the Celestial City is put under siege by the Dragon Kids, who have put aside their differences and are now working together against the Monkey King. And from what we understand, this battle is horrific, where the Skaven boil up from beneath Wei-Jin, which we know, as we said, that already, I think 800 years ago, so well before this point, a Talayan had already seen there was a lot of Skaven beneath the city. So you know there were a shitload of them beneath Wei-Jin waiting for this moment. I mean, this is basically like the Black Plague for Cathay, Empire scenario, where the Skaven boil up, and there were probably Skaven all over the nation, actually attacking everywhere, I would guess. This was their great moment. And this huge final battle breaks out. I imagine huge portions of Wei-Jin were probably destroyed or burned and consumed in warp fire. Skaven war machines. Just imagine the most horrific thing you can involving Skaven. And they're also allied with the Monkey Warriors and the Monkey Emperor ruling above it all. And even then, the alliance of Clan Eshin and this Monkey King, the Dragon Children, cannot beat him. I wouldn't be surprised if taking the throne allowed him to use the compass for himself, and he was using it to make things even worse. And this is honestly kind of an end time scenario for the Dragon Children if the Monkey King, especially with the Skaven involved, isn't careful, which he does not sound like the most cautious individual. If he's anything personality wise like the Monkey King from Our World's The Journey to the West, who is not a cautious individual. very, very over the top, goofy trickster archetype that's very fucking scary in a fight. But the battle is finally won when, amidst all this turmoil, with probably a storm of magic and all sorts of crazy shit hitting the fan, Dad comes home with Mom. And the two of them come back and they're fucking furious. And I would argue they probably didn't want to come back. It probably wasn't like, oh, they just happened to come home at the right time. It was probably they realized that if they didn't come back, the Celestial City would fall. And the compass would either... Yeah, well, I mean, like, literally fall. Like, the compass might have been overcharged. Can you imagine the Skaven getting their hands on the Wuxing compass?
Yep.
Like, holy sweet fuck, that is bad. That is really bad. I honestly think they were forced home too early. And with them showing up, the Monkey King goes, nope, I'm out. I'm not fighting Xinyan. Fuck that. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And he just pisses off back to the south and resumes things as normal. And the Skaven get crushed. Like, absolutely crushed. Which may be why, kind of the modern time, the Skaven aren't as active as you might expect in Grand Cathay, because fairly recently they were dealt a pretty crippling blow. But
although Skaven do breed fast.
They do breed fast. I can imagine that the
200 years, that's not recent to the Skaven. That's like a big generations ago.
Yeah, but it's interesting to think that I would wager to say that the Undercity, which I didn't actually think about this before now, the Undercity beneath Wei-Jin may be in far worse of a state than we would initially assume, compared to the likes of Under Altdorf or Under Mindenheim and stuff. Because with the Skaven boiling up, Cathay would have been like, that needs to go.
Purge. Yeah. Interesting story. I like all of it. I like Mom and Dad coming home and having to stop whatever it is that they're doing. I like the ramifications of this being potentially the ultimate downfall towards Cathay as a whole, because they didn't get to finish off what they were intending to do. There's lots of cool seeds that are sown here by this story. However, it also reinforces one of my great loves of the Warhammer world, and that's how Skaven are ultimately small C chaos, not big C chaos. And that's one thing I've always liked about them. And I will admit, seeing the more recent developments since Age of Sigmar, where Horned Rat goes big C chaos, very much turns me off completely. It just makes me go, no. Regardless of how much they're trying to reinforce the Horned Rat as a major faction leader, so to speak. I think this is a great use of the Skaven as a whole, showing that they are always looking to reinforce their own position and take more as and when they can. They are consumers at heart. They are vermin. And I just think it's a great wee tale. I'm particularly looking forward to seeing what they do with the Monkey King, because the Monkey King is one of those characters that is as amorphous as anything else that's left to the imagination. It's not been pinned down. It's been given a bunch of individual stories. It's allied with a bunch of what clearly looks to be bad guys, while simultaneously often working with what appears to be good guys. There's a great deal of interest in what that character could be. And the second they start pinning details down, those details are going to have to justify something that wants to potentially rule all of Cathay from the good old capital. Who is that guy? What's going on there? And I think that'll be a super fun thing to see, hopefully explored over the course of the next couple of years. I imagine most likely through Total War.
Yeah, I will say I'm really excited to have a character who's that level of neutral. Not in the sense of like neutral being like, oh, he's a fence sitter, but that he just does whatever the fuck he wants. And whatever's opportune for him at the time. Like, really, the closest thing we have to that are, like the ogres and the Tomb Kings are often considered fairly neutral factions. And it's been a long time since we've had a new one introduced. I mean, the ogres came out like the actual,
that was a long time ago now.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. So the Monkey King represents a really, really 6th edition, but it was like
Ogre Kingdoms.
Yeah, it was pretty early in 6 too. So that was like early 2000s. But there are a lot of really, really fun stories there. But after I read, actually, I'll let us do kind of our outro thing, and then we'll get caught up on the super chat stuff. Of that kind of brings us to the end. for
Okay.
Wei-Jin in the Celestial City, pretty much right on time.
So I'm going to bring up a couple of things that I liked about this in general. And that's that, number one, there's not actually that much detail out there, which you may have noticed throughout the course of this chat. We don't have an awful lot about Cathay as a whole, but those few small details can lead to the extrapolation of some pretty big potential outcomes here, because we know that Cathay as a whole has been given this almost propaganda-esque level of capability, but we also know through the only game where they're currently present, which is Total War, that the entire thing's broken. Broken to its very core. Come the end times, there's warring factions and difficult groups, and they are not working well together. The Dragon Kids aren't working well together either. And the capital sits there as an almost representation of the overall state of Cathay. And I'm, as I say right at the very beginning, intrigued as to where it came from. And the answer is a very, 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 very long time ago. The dream of two individuals who had their kids and a desire to protect one of the, let's use the classic terms, tribes of humanity. Let's call them the Cathayans. They chose to protect one of the tribes of humanity for whatever their individual reasons were. Doesn't matter if it was the Dragon Emperor that chose this or the Empress. As a unit, as a combination of yin and yang, they chose to protect this city. And this city, over the course of time, came to represent the yin and the yang of their very lives. Everything that they had brought to the table, that they represented in their nice little swirl of disparate characters, was represented not just through their city, but through the entire empire that would eventually build around it as Grand Cathay became a thing, as the great spirity Soli River pops up, as our great bastions put in place, as they expand outwards and each of the Dragon Kids take over certain parts of the empire, with the imperial capital, for all it feels center, it's not directly in the center, standing at the heart of it all. Pardon?
I said not even close.
It's not even close, right north. Standing at the heart of it all. And this city continues to thrive because it is not just one aspect of life. It is the great balancing between the two. It's got the extremes on both sides existent within it. And it ends up becoming the biggest city in the Warhammer world that we know of so far. With a giant floating city above it, protected by pretty much the symbols of yin and yang above it, who are, as far as Warhammer entities go, as powerful as you can get without being a god, and arguably more powerful because they're entirely material anyway, able to go toe to toe with entities that other parts of the Warhammer world espouse as being the most powerful. And they're setting up artifacts, creating an empire that can hold them all off with relative ease. And it ultimately, come the end, brings us up with what appears to be a perfect empire. But as we've discussed with the arrival of the Monkey King and various others, the Dragon Kids themselves and the Emperor having to leave for one reason or another, there are lots of seams and fractures throughout this great creation, this great work. The Wuxing compass can't point in all directions, and because of that, there is always weakness left in its wake, as the power that's pushed one way diminishes and the power increases elsewhere. And these cracks, these fissures, have left us with an empire that, whilst it may appear perfect, and leaving us with a position where we could say something like, well, in comparison to the empire, it looks so much more powerful and would crush it. Yes, but it's fractured. It's broken, and the kids squabble. They need their parents, or they go off in their own directions, have their own concerns, whether that's the moss whispering away in one of the kids' ears, or whether that's the fact one of them just likes doing her own thing, or whether that's one of them is far too stern to do the job that she needs to do, or whether that's one of them literally crushing underneath the weight of responsibility, whatever it might be. These kids do not get on very well. They're too old, too stuck in their ways, and too stuck in their various versions of the yin and the yang into which they've been thrust. Ultimately, the great construction of the Empress and the Emperor is broken. And that leads into the end times. And for me, the biggest break of the whole thing is that we don't have its story. We don't know how all of this was really built and led to its destruction. We don't really know the Warhammer story of it all. All we have is hints, leaving us to come up with a variety of, let's say, super random stuff for what the Emperor could be. Kind of random through the course of this. We basically said he could be a chaos creature. He could be a god. He could be becoming something entirely new. Yeah, you can say all of these things, and all of them could be true because we don't have answers. And I think that for me, that is the greatest shame of Cathay, and that is that Total War created something awesome, and the studio equally, Games Workshop Studio, has built into that awesome, but we're not getting to see any of it. None of it's getting to actually hit our tables if we're playing games of the old world or something similar. It's not really hitting any other computer game, and the speed at which Total War Warhammer proceeds is so glacially slow that we see so little of this, and it feels like one enormous wasted opportunity that's just waiting to be used by something else. And I, for one, want to know more.
Yeah. Get on, GW. We're all going to die eventually. Hurry up.
Totally. I'll be dead before we get any actual cool lore hitting on it. I want my own bloody miniature for Miao Ying or something. That'd be bloody. I'd buy that in a shot. Damn straight I would.
Yep. And I mean, just thinking about the stream. Hey, this was a very fun stream. I'm glad y'all voted for this. I mean, just the discussion, which I was not expecting because, like, I just pulled it up, but I hadn't actually thought about what I was looking at. The Temple of the Two Moons is such a fucking huge, like, wait, what?
What?
Moment. That was excellent. So let me get, I think there's one super chat we need to cover, and then
one we need to worry about.
It's time to get everybody out of here.
It is. And thanks everyone who turned up for the stream. It's been a really fun one. I've really enjoyed this.
The journey to the old world. Oh my god. Ogre Pixie, Sandy Lizardman, Singswan Monk. Oh dude, someone making a fan version of Journey to the West with Warhammer characters could be hysterical.
Journey to the old world. You could do a really good one with that, couldn't you?
That could be absolutely fucking hilarious.
I really quite like the idea. I'm particularly like, I mean, if I was creating, just as a nice little last point, if I was creating some form of the Monkey King, I absolutely would want it to at least nod towards not just the Journey to the West, but to the many versions of the Journey to the West that we've had, whether that's the extraordinarily overwrought Monkey series that was kicking around in the 70s and the 80s. And it's terrible dubbing. Oh man, it's so bad. I loved Monkey. I'm flying around in his little cloud. It was bloody marvelous. Or whether that's the more recent, was it New Zealand or was it Australia? I think it was New Zealand that produced a Monkey show. It's over on Netflix, or at least it was. I can't remember where it was. It was one of those Antipodean options. There are so many great versions of that, including computer games as well. And it has been a story that's been told and retold multiple times. But having Monkey and perhaps having him constrained, or perhaps having him potentially being led astray by the Chaos Gods as they use him because of his great power. Against their enemies, and then he breaks free. Or perhaps the Monkey King was never never brought the Skaven on as allies. The allies were literally, the Skaven army were literally using him. They'd used an artifact to control him and use him against them. And with the arrival of the
like the
totally. The circlet is broken, and the Monkey King can then become his own individual again. And that's pure chaos released with a small c, not big C. And I think that would be equally fun. There's lots of ways you'd want to reinterpret that. But for me, I think it's a character that I'm super excited by.
Yeah. The Monkey. I cannot wait till we can do Lord Beards on the Monkey King. That's going to be a fun one.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that brings us to the end of today's stream. We hope you all had a lot of fun and enjoyed yourselves. I know we did. We will be back on Wednesday evening with creating a Slanesh Chaos Champion, which should be a really good time.
There's been so many good ideas for that over on the Discord chat, by the way. If you haven't dived in, do go down and have a good look through it. There's been everything from fan art to long pitched ideas. There's so much cool down there. That's on my Discord channel, isn't it?
Yes.
That's over on the LAWhammer one. Links are over on YouTube right now. If you're on YouTube, down inside the video description, dive in there and go find the thread for it, because it's
cool. Andy, I just realized there was something wrong this entire stream.
What was that?
Where the hell is Dark Deeds?
Where is it? Oh, see, I was at a convention yesterday.
It's not here. Where is it?
I will say that come Wednesday we will have our actual first production copy of it, because I have it. It's in cellophane. It's currently sitting in my office out there because I took it back from the convention I was just at, and it's currently been popped in there. And Dark Deeds we've got our first on one, and we're going to do an unboxing of it very soon. So that's going to be super,
I'm
fun.
fucking excited for that.
Yeah.
Is it safe? Is it safe? Where is it, Andy? Where is he? But yeah, thank you all again terribly much, especially for all the support, all the super chats and everything. Thank you. We cannot ever thank you guys enough. I despite how wordy we are as individuals, we lack the language to thank you properly, and always shall. But with that,
you trying to say we talk too much?
A little bit. We'll see. We'll see you guys Wednesday evening, and there will be a vote up today on Andy's channel,
on my channel, or my YouTube channel. You'll find it over there in about the next half hour to an hour.
Yeah, for the next Lorebeards. And I can tell you on not this week's Lorebeards, but the one after that, I will be taking over the vote by force for a particular set of topics. So look forward to that.
Really intrigued. Having said that, though, oh wait a minute, there might not be a Lorebeards next Sunday because I think I'm seeing Taylor Swift.
Right.
Yeah, I'm off to see Taylor Swift, that well-known character of chaos. So yeah, that's going to be fun.
So stay tuned for updates on schedule stuff.
We will probably do a Lorebeards next week anyway, but maybe on a different day. So we will basically tell you after we've both chatted after this stream.
Yeah, the most powerful of the dark gods, T Swift. Let's get out of here.
See y'all later. Bye bye.